Chapter 7:15. At first, the words that he saw were indeed without rhyme or reason. They were all bits and pieces such as, there will always be a reward for your efforts. The world is a giant cage. Everyone has the right to escape, and even ants have their own happiness. In his world, this was called chicken soup. If he used it too much, it would be called poisonous chicken soup. Every sentence took up the entire screen. He had to click on it to see the next sentence. Li Yunxin only read a few sentences before realizing that this might be something like a signature. It should be a folder that stored some greetings, or something like that. Why is Qin Zhao doing this too? There were many similar sentences. Li Yunxin used the skip function that he'd learned before to read further. That was why he was interested, because he saw another sentence at the back. They're really shameful. The style of this sentence was completely different from the previous ones. When he saw this sentence, he immediately stopped. He realized that there might be something hidden in this folder that would surprise him. So he suppressed the urge to continue reading and went back to the beginning. His research on the art saint's past might point to some huge secret hidden in this world. He could not let go of any clues, nor could he overlook a single detail. When it came to this document, it meant that perhaps every sentence had its own unique meaning. He first put the jade slip on the windowsill. Then he waved it in the air and a cup of steaming tea landed on the windowsill. He picked up the cup, took a sip and exhaled softly. He used his divine sense to sense the surroundings of the mountain. After confirming that everything was fine, he picked up the jade slip again. He flipped through it page by page with great patience. It took him 2 hours to read from the first to the 646th. When the sunlight from outside the window moved to his face and turned orange, he put the jade slip down again. The tea that he'd only taken a sip was already cold. The first thing he confirmed was that the 646 lines didn't mean 646 days. It might be longer. Rather than calling it a signature, it was more like a diary that recorded his thoughts and feelings. The first few dozen comments were simply to express his emotions. His words revealed some bewilderment and sadness. It was as if the person who wrote these words was at a loss for what to do. Li Yunxin analyzed as he read. He believed that Qin Zhao had probably written these down when he first came to this world. He wasn't used to the new environment. But the next 2 sentences made him overturn his guess and realize that he was ridiculously wrong. They were numbered 225 and 226 respectively. No one will do more for him than I do. Why does everyone let themselves be immersed in fear? Time can comfort and heal everything. I know them better these days. What else could one do in deep space but fear and awe? But fortunately, fear also means hope. Li Yunxin suppressed the urge to guess who he was. These days meant that there was a period of time between the 2 sentences and that they were not written 2 days apart. The previous sentences should have the same situation. Combined with the lingering melancholy and pessimism in these words, it was unlikely that someone in such an emotional state would write down their feelings frequently in a day. This meant that the 646 lines that he had read so far might have been written over a period of 3 years or more. Once he immersed himself in these words, his initial doubt that this wasn't Qin Zhao's style disappeared. People would change significantly in a few years. Many people would look back at what they had said and done 5 years ago and think, how is this possible? In deep space. These 4 words overturned Li Yunxin's guess. From Xiexing's words, he realized that the language habits of his world were very similar to his own. Then there shouldn't be any other explanation for deep space. It should be referring to the universe or space. This coincided with what Xiexing said about them being able to travel through space. They had the ability to travel through space. Qin Zhao also said in deep space. It seemed to be hinting that the people around them were afraid, so they did not get along very well. Hence they had a dispute over a certain matter. Li Yunxin thought that when Qin Zhao wrote these things, it was very likely that she was on a long journey. It was so long that many people were afraid and felt that the future was uncertain. Probably wasn't in this world when she wrote these things. Li Yunxin frowned slightly. He felt that his guess was correct, but there was one thing he couldn't explain. The many traces Qin Zhao had left showed that she was familiar with some things in his world. How did she know? Perhaps there would be an answer in the future. The following words were still filled with negative emotions. But this negativity also changed subtly. Li Yunxin memorized every sentence in his head and then jumped out from the words and skimmed through them as a whole. Then he realized that the feeling of loss at the beginning was fading. He became calm. It was as if he had gotten used to deep space travel or something else. This state continued until the 645th sentence. We are all in the current. Go with the flow or be drowned. There was nothing special about this sentence, compared to the previous ones. But in the next sentence, the 646th sentence, a change occurred. I can do it. This was one of the few sentences in the record that had strong emotions. The previous 645th sentence formed an image or a state. A girl playing with her phone, sitting on a chair, sighing softly and recording her thoughts. Occasionally she would be excited, but she would soon be drowned by sadness. But she still had hope for some people and things. However, due to the depression of the people around her, she could only bury that little bit of hope. She would only use it to warm herself when she was the most helpless. But when she reached this sentence, the scene seemed to change. The girl stood up. Her eyes were bright and spirited. She said firmly, I can do it. The two states were too different. Li Yunxin was sure that a long time had passed between the two sentences. During this time he didn't have the time or the chance to record his thoughts. He only wrote this sentence after he made a decision. What he saw next confirmed his conjecture. He put down the jade slip and looked at the sunset on the ocean outside the window to clear his mind. Then he picked it up again and spent 4 hours reading the next 125 sentences. He read until the moon hung high in the sky. The sentence that had piqued his interest and made him exclaim in surprise was the 98th sentence out of the 125 sentences. The sentence before this sentence revealed a completely different emotion from the previous 646th sentence. If Li Yunxin hadn't carefully read the previous records and simulated the development of the matter in her mind, she would have thought that it was written by two completely different people. The style of writing was also completely different. The previous 600 or so sentences were mostly to express empty and general emotions. It was as if the recorder's life was boring and there weren't any details that could attract her attention. But these 120 sentences became more detailed. It was also this that made Li Yunxin feel like he was a diary. Most of the words were meaningful and pointed to a specific person or thing. This should mean that when these words were recorded, the recorder's life had undergone an earth-shattering change. The emotions in her heart surged, and her life was indeed filled with many things that made her feel refreshed. Li Yunxin was sure that these were things that Qin Zhao had recorded after coming to this world. For example, it feels so good to have my feet on the ground. It confirmed Li Yunxin's guess. They had indeed been traveling in deep space before. We've lost too much. Did this mean that they'd lost the earth and sky? Or did it mean something else? I can save them. Qin Zhao was in high spirits, no longer as lost and worried as before. This also meant that she hadn't come to this world by accident. He had a goal and a mission, to save. But, did them refer to everyone in this world or the so-called elders on Cloud Mountain? Li Yunxin thought of the sentence, they're so shameful. They should refer to the elders of Cloud Mountain. At least at first. I feel like a god. This sentence was recorded after the other dozen sentences. Li Yunxin thought that Qin Zhao had recorded the first dozen sentences when she'd just come into contact with the supernatural abilities of this world. It expressed joy, emotion, and curiosity. When she reached this sentence, it should mean that she had learned something. Both her emotions and tone were starting to resemble the art saint that Qin Zhao was familiar with. Then a key point appeared in the 74th sentence. Rather than a sentence, it was more like a paragraph. Xin Mu is completely different from the person in history. I thought he should be tall, majestic, and shining. In the end he spoke like a madman. But he's clearly more human than the one in history. So there's something between the two of them. The main idea of this paragraph was to express the surprise that the recorder felt after seeing the person in history. It's not the same at all. This was very normal. Even a person might not understand themselves, let alone a bystander. Xin Mu should be the Xin Mu who'd created the art path. When this paragraph was recorded, it should be 2,200 years ago when Qin Zhao met Xin Mu. From these words, Xin Mu should be an important person, someone who'd be recorded in history. And Xin Mu was a celestial. This meant that the celestials living in the astral plane and the gods in the eyes of the common people were people from Qin Zhao's world. At least in the past. But for some reason the celestials stayed in this world. And Qin Zhao's original mission was to save them. Chapter 716. There was such a thing between the two of them should be referring to Shenmu and another person. That person should also be in the history of his previous world. Or maybe it was just someone from the same era who wasn't important to the current situation. At this point, Li Yunxin paused and exhaled softly. He drew another line in the void of space and drew another cup of tea. He took a sip and felt the heat in his mouth and the cold outside the window. He looked up at the starry sky. The galaxy above the ocean was brilliant. The stars gathered in one place, outlining the brilliant Milky Way. This was a beautiful scene that was extremely rare in his previous world. Was the astral plane, where the celestials lived in this starry sky, or was it another space? In the past, Li Yunxin had thought about celestials and astral plane. But back then he didn't even know what celestials were. There was no point in thinking too much. But now he realized that the so-called celestials were also pitiful creatures waiting to be saved. This waiting might have lasted for tens of thousands of years. During this time they were also saving themselves. They created the celestial gate. They introduced the rules of this world and made mortals cultivate the bodies of the Grand Supreme for them to use. But this was obviously very slow. They still needed help from people in his previous world. Li Yunxin wanted to know what had caused the current situation, but he didn't have any clues at the moment. However, Shenmu's existence might be able to provide some clues. The techniques passed down by Daotong and Kenzo were most likely created by Shenmu when he was a celestial. And Shenmu had once possessed Yu Meng. According to Yu Meng, Shenmu told him that he had a disagreement with the celestials in the astral plane. That was why he came down in an unconventional way, which led to the strange things that happened to Yu Meng. Perhaps this statement could be verified. He had tailor-made a painting technique for Qin Zhao. And the painting technique was immediately destroyed by the celestial gate. This should be the will of the celestials. In other words, the celestials had a falling out with their savior Qin Zhao. Li Yunxin's deduction was confirmed in the next few dozen sentences. From the words, it seemed that a long time had passed between these sentences. It was extremely likely that it would take decades or even centuries. During this period of time, it was also time for Qin to enter the Sage Realm, enter the Cloud Mountain and establish the painting Dao. There weren't many words, but each of them showed that her thoughts and position had changed drastically. At first she shouldered the responsibility of rescuing the Devis. But gradually she seemed to have developed a favorable impression of the current world. As a result, he developed a sense of disgust towards the heavenly man's method of nurturing people for his own use. That is why he said, "Shame on them." The other sentences also caught Li Yunxin's attention, but he couldn't make a definite inference at the moment. The legend is actually true. Can I do it? I should live for myself. These few sentences undoubtedly contained a huge amount of information. Li Yunxin even believed that they were the key to solving all the mysteries. A certain legend that had been proven to be true had a huge impact on Qin Zhao's worldview, outlook on life and values. It made her completely release her inner self. Perhaps this could explain the Qin Zhao that Li Yunxin saw later, leaving all sorts of traces in the world and becoming interesting. This should be the result of living for herself, as she said. The last sentence in the document was, "Die with no regrets." At this point, Li Yunxin had already read all 774 sentences. He could feel the changes in Qin Zhao. From an ordinary girl who was slightly lost and terrified about life to the art saint who had left behind many incredible relics in the world. There probably wouldn't be any contact more intimate than this. He was facing the softest and most private part of her heart. In the past, the art saint was just a symbol, a piece of history. But through these 774 sentences, she was restored to a living person in Li Yunxin's heart. But it was also at this moment that he felt something in his heart was removed. Removed wasn't an appropriate description. It was more like there had been something in the beginning. As he understood Qin Zhao, this thing slowly melted and flowed. In the end, it vaporized and flowed into his body. He could still feel their existence, but it was difficult to touch them again. He spaced out for a while. The moon was bright in the sky and the stars were brilliant. But he slowly experienced a sense of helplessness. This helplessness gradually condensed in his chest and blocked it. Thus he sighed softly and let it out. Qin Zhao. Li Yunxin tapped his finger lightly on the windowsill. After a few breaths, he sighed again. He's just a person. The urgent desire and expectation in his heart dissipated with these 2 breaths. He didn't know whether to be happy or worried. After a quarter of an hour he slowly put away the jade slip and stood up. 6 hours ago he was bathing in the sun. Now he was bathing in the moonlight. The last 4 words were, "Die with no regrets." But did this mean that Qin Zhao was prepared to die, or was he prepared to throw himself into something and die with no regrets? If it was the latter, it might mean that the art saint wasn't dead yet. The last dozens of sentences showed that Qin Zhao was going to part ways with the celestial sect. She was the art saint at that time and had unimaginable powers. How could someone like her not have a way out? Even if she died, it couldn't be an ending like, the art saint went crazy and was killed by the 2 saints. If she didn't die, where would she be now? Li Yunxin walked to the window and pondered. Taoist Qingshui and the owner of Southwood Lodge couldn't be the art saint. Their styles were completely different. They couldn't be the same person. And the land and sea of this world had been turned upside down. If Qin Zhao had been hiding in a corner, she wouldn't have ignored the impassioned last 4 words. She could scold them for being shameful for feeding people, but she wouldn't have watched the hundreds of millions of people on the land suffer. She wasn't in this world and she wouldn't be in the astral world either. It didn't seem like a good place to go. Then was she in the netherworld? Xiexing wanted to go to Dragon Island to find Shinryu because of a few words from him. It seemed to mean that Shinryu was connected to the art saint. Now Li Yunxin knew that Shinryu was drawn by the art saint. As for why, he guessed it was to take over. Otherwise, why would the totem and sacred ancestor in his world be the dragon mother in this world? It was very likely that she made it for him. But later, for some reason, she didn't take away Shinryu's emptiness, and only took some of its power? So, back then the White Hell King had imparted the possession art to him. He said that dragons were emptiness. At that time he guessed that this method wasn't by Yanjun's own idea but someone else's. This, someone else, was most likely Qin Zhao. Bai Yanjun knew the method of taking over. He was in the netherworld. Xiexing insisted on going to Dragon Island to find Shinryu. Shinryu guarded the entrance to the netherworld. It seemed that all the clues pointed to that world. Art Saint Qin Zhao faked his death 1,000 years ago and snuck into the netherworld. In the nether realm, there seemed to be an incident, a legend. Qin Zhao was inspired by this legend and was ready to sacrifice his life. If he had known this earlier, he could have tried to ask Bai Yanjun. He would have been able to get some information out of him and figure out some things. As for now, he wanted to get Dragon Island. Before this, he had been pushed, as Li Chunfeng put it. Even 15 minutes ago, the only thing that drove him forward was to figure out the truth. But now he finally had a real and clear goal: to take Dragon Island and the entrance to the netherworld. Although he had experienced many things, he always participated in them as an unimportant person. He borrowed the power of others or was borrowed by others. But now an opportunity was presented to him. To control the entrance to the netherworld, he would become a player in the game. He could sit on the table and talk instead of being placed on it. But what was the thing that Qin Zhao went to the netherworld for? Li Yunxin admired the emotion she had when she recorded the words, "Die with no regrets." But he didn't know if he could do it. He stood in front of the window for a while. But he didn't look relieved after solving the mystery. Because in his heart there was a faint premonition. He always felt that he seemed to have missed something. To him, hunches often meant that his subjective consciousness had ignored some clues that might have been recorded by his subconscious. But he couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he tried. Just then he saw a flash of light at the border of the sea and sky. It looked like an inconspicuous light. Then the light flashed a few more times. About a dozen breaths later there was a deep sound like thunder. That should be Emperor Li's doing. Perhaps they had encountered some unruly great demon and thus started to fight. Li Yunxin shook his head. Then he froze. That light was like a lamp, illuminating a thought that existed in his subconscious. Jade Scroll. Jade Scroll of Enlightenment. He had been focusing on the contents of the scroll from beginning to end, but neglected the thing itself. This thing. Art Saint had been carrying it with him ever since he was in the other world. However, she had also brought this thing to this world. And how did he come here? Soul transmigration. He only brought his own soul from the other world. Because of that, when he needed a medium to guide the willpower of his world into this world, the medium he used was himself. But what about Shinryu? The core of Shinryu, according to his previous speculation, was the dragon scale. If the dragon scale could be used as a medium to guide the wishes of Qin Zhao's world here, did it mean that the dragon scale was also brought from her world? In her world, dragons really existed. She could bring things from there, the dragon scale and the jade scroll. Did it mean that this world and Qin Zhao's world were not originally unrelated like Li Yunqin's world? Or was it simply the same world? But what about Xiexing? Why did he come here as a soul? Qin Zhao left the jade scroll and didn't destroy it. Did he have other intentions? Chapter 717. Li Yunqin had a troubled night. He seemed to have gotten used to being busy. Even now, when the war was taking a break, he couldn't stop his mind from thinking. He went to check his scroll, but Xiexing's mind still hadn't fully recovered. He regretted being too hasty a few days ago and driving this person crazy. If he had asked after reading Qin Zhao's memories in the translucent jade scroll, he might have been able to get more details easily. He spent the next 3 days in the stone room and didn't take a step out. He checked the words Qin Zhao left behind repeatedly, trying to get deeper information. Unfortunately, it didn't work. But Qin Fengzi seemed to be in a hurry. Li Yunqin used his supernatural power and knew who he had contacted several times. Maybe it was his fellow sect members on Sanxian Mountain, or maybe it was the 10,000-year-old ancestor. After communicating, this former leader of the vast army tried to persuade him to cooperate with the lifeless immortal gate. But Li Yunqin only said that he had to wait for news of Qin Jun entering the Dragon Island. Just like that, another 10 days passed leisurely. He drank tea, drank wine, and tasted the strange delicacies. He practiced the painting Dao technique in the translucent jade scroll and studied the other functions of the scroll. Although it didn't work, he realized that this thing wasn't just 4 records. There seemed to be other functions and information. He couldn't see them, but he knew they existed. When he injected his demon power, the documents poured out like a storm, leaving only 1 or 2 at a time. What he had come into contact with was just a drop in the ocean. It was as if the scroll was originally a piece of paper filled with pictures, and the information he had come into contact with was just written on the corner of the paper. What were the rest? In these 13 days, thunder rumbled from time to time from near to far. This should be the army of ghosts led by Emperor Li and Emperor Yi. They pushed their way through and tamed all the wild demons. Emperor Li was in a good mood, but he seemed to miss Qin Jun. Although he didn't know why he missed Li Yunqin. He would come back every 2 days to ask Li Yunqin about his progress and proudly talk about the results. In his words, even the ocean demon kings could not withstand a single blow. There were a few tough ones, but it only took him 6 to 8 hours to deal with them. On the other hand, when he came back the day before yesterday, he cursed out loud, saying that he had encountered a troublesome character. Li Yunqin was bored and joked about whether he should do it himself. Emperor Li said that it was a piece of cake and it wouldn't take long. However, he hadn't shown up until tonight. Presumably, he hadn't made any progress. Otherwise, he would have come back long ago to show off. In fact, Li Yunqin knew which bone Emperor Li had bitten. His picture scroll included the 9 seas, and no major changes in energy activity in the seas could escape his control. Emperor Li and Emperor Yi were blocked near the vast formation. It was the formation of the lifeless immortal sect. Li Yunqin had never personally gone to investigate. That formation had been in operation for tens of thousands of years. Although he was confident, he was not conceited. He knew that it would be difficult to deal with him. If he went there personally, he might fall into a trap and cause trouble. He heard from Qin Fengzi that the formation was about to be completed. It was best for Emperor Li to go on his behalf. A peak of the mysterious realm with hundreds of thousands of ghost soldiers. Even if something happened, he could probably protect himself. The spiritual energy in the formation had become denser and denser. If they surrounded it, they might force out someone. For example, the person Li Yunqin was waiting for tonight. He might not come. But if he wanted to come, he would come in the next few days. If he didn't come the day before or yesterday, there was a high chance he would come today. So tonight Li Yunqin only did one thing: wait. From the moon rising until it hung high in the sky. He sat by the window and looked at the ocean in the distance. After a long time he could see the shape of the fog rising from the sea like the clouds in the sky. At this time, it should be the middle of winter on the land. The Qin kingdom had always had 4 distinct seasons. Right now it might be snowing heavily. It should have snowed 6 or 7 times before. He remembered that a dozen years ago the snow was very heavy. Each year it would be above his knees. The mountains and fields were a vast expanse of white. But thinking back to these years, he felt that it was colder in recent years. When he was young, he felt that the snow was heavy. Maybe it was because he was short. At that time it was above his knees. Now it was just below his ankles. Today, come to think of it, it should be the 26th of October. In another 30 days it would be New Year. New Year. Ha. When this word jumped out of Li Yunxin's head, he couldn't help but let out a soft ha. In his previous life, the taste of New Year was already very faint. Maybe only he had a faint taste of New Year. The old man would make some dumplings, wine, and make New Year's Eve dinner. Most of the time the next day he would start eating leftovers again. When he was in a good mood he would make a whip. But in his memory it was only once. When he was ready to light a fire on the street, he was taken away by the law enforcers and fined a sum of money. The old man was so angry that he beat him up. But at night he drank too much and cried while hugging him. He couldn't hear clearly what he was mumbling. At that time, Li Yunxin tried to understand his feelings. But how could he understand? Since he came to this world, he didn't seem to have a good New Year. Li Chunfeng and Sheng Guanyu were both cultivators. They didn't care about those things. The festivals that cultivators celebrated were different from mortals. Most of them celebrated the birthday of this emperor or that emperor. If they were still in Daotong or Kenzhou, there would be more festivals to celebrate. In theory, every day could be considered a festival. There were hundreds of saints in the history of Xianmen. The day each of them was born was Christmas, and the day each of them ascended was Immortal Day. In addition, there were the birthdays of many elders and masters in the sect. If they celebrated like mortals, they might have to eat dozens of dumplings every day. Therefore, even if cultivators didn't celebrate, they celebrated every day. When they first entered the sect, there was a daily task called fasting. It was to wake up early, wash your face, sit cross-legged, and recite the names of many ancestors and masters to calm your mind. This was actually celebrating. But now he wanted to experience the taste of New Year. If things went well after 30 days. Hopefully when that day came he wouldn't be fighting someone to the death and he wouldn't be on the verge of death. That would really spoil the fun. Li Yunxin sighed in a low voice. Sigh. Although it was warmer on the ocean than on land, the smell of breath had turned into fog. Mortals exhaled into fog because they had body heat. When demons and cultivators reached a very high realm, the only things they had in common with mortals were their human form and meridians. There was no need to breathe and there was no need for body heat. But they still needed to breathe because spiritual energy flowed through their meridians. The human body was a sophisticated system. When cultivators tempered their bodies, it was like modifying this system. But no matter how much they modified it, there would always be some redundant functions. Therefore, when spiritual energy flowed, there would naturally be breathing. But this was fundamentally different from breathing, which mortals relied on to survive. As for body heat, he didn't know what others would do. But Li Yunxin liked the feeling of his body being slightly warm. If he abandoned body heat and let his body be as cold as ordinary objects, there were many inconveniences. For example, if he touched something next to him, he wouldn't know whether it was cold or warm. His sense of touch would also be affected and he might have to divert his attention to take a look. In fact, looking at it this way, the various functions of the mortal body were actually almost perfect. Cultivators defy the heavens and change their fate. Apart from obtaining longevity and supernatural powers, it was hard to say how much they had lost. As he thought about it, he watched the breath he exhaled slowly dissipate. The fog gradually faded in the moonlight and danced along with the airflow. It was as if the air had become an invisible and untouchable wall, causing the fog to float straight up a wall. Li Yunxin slowly straightened his body. "I've been waiting for a long time for our honored guest," he said in a low voice. "How long have you been here?" So a translucent figure slowly condensed in front of him. The breath he exhaled just now had hit this wall after drifting away. The person was only 2 steps away from him. For mortals, this distance was appropriate. But for cultivators and demons, appearing at such a distance was almost equivalent to standing in front of someone's face. This was under the condition that Li Yunxin's thoughts were distracted and he didn't notice it. He was unhappy because of this, but he didn't show it. The person in front of him was translucent. His body flickered, obviously not a physical body. He didn't use the method of soul incarnation. but another supernatural power that Li Yunxin had never seen before. It was an old man with white hair and beard. His eyebrows hung down long and converged in his white beard. His head was round and big and his face was full of flesh and bones. He looked very much like a benevolent old man. He was wearing a long hemp robe. He first blinked at Li Yunxin, then took a step back and cupped his hands. I just arrived. I'm out of practice. I'm Rude Dragon King." Li Yunxin stared at him without batting an eyelid, then said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency is the 10,000-year-old ancestor." Yes. The benevolent old man replied with a smile. He looked left and right and waved his hand. So he grabbed a small stool by the wall and sat down. He twisted his body to make himself more comfortable. Then, like a real old man, he let out a long breath comfortably. Li Yunxin frowned slightly. The 10,000-year-old ancestor made him feel strange. He couldn't say what was strange, but every action and every word made him feel strange. However, this strange didn't feel dangerous. Many times his intuition would discover the danger of things one step ahead of him and would also give him hints. But now there was no such hint. He just felt that the 10,000-year-old ancestor shouldn't be like this. What did out of practice mean? Looking at his current speech and behavior, it seemed that he wanted to be humble and friendly. But if he wanted to do so, he shouldn't have directly appeared in the room 2 steps away when he wasn't paying attention. That wasn't friendly behavior, and could even be considered a provocation. Chapter 7:18. Emperor Li went to cause trouble for the vast sea formation. Li Yunxin thought that if the 10,000-year ancestor really didn't want to start a war with him, he should have realized that this matter couldn't be resolved through Qin Fengzi's words. He would have used some method to talk to him personally. He was also prepared for the other to be angry, but the situation before him was so strange. He coughed lightly and said, "Then the ancestor is here for the vast sea formation?" The old man smiled and sighed. Sigh. "The Dragon King sent an army to attack that formation." "It wasn't me," Li Yunxin said. The old man waved his hand as if to say, "It's the same thing anyway. Isn't it just to force me out?" Say, "It's not that I don't want to meet the Dragon King. It's just that it's inconvenient before." Li Yunxin frowned again. He realized that the 10,000-year ancestor in front of him, if it was real, might be difficult to deal with. What kind of person was easy to deal with? Someone like the 9th young master was easy to deal with. He didn't have any schemes and could do whatever he wanted. Yunzi, Su Yusong and Zhuo Muzha were easy to deal with. Although their cultivation levels were worlds apart, they were essentially the same. They were very confident in their own abilities. They thought that everything in the world was under their control and that they were the smartest people in the world. For such people, as long as he had more information than them or even just a little bit more, their confidence would become their biggest weakness. Because of their cultivation methods, most Taoists were confident. This was their innate flaw. In recent times, Lord Donghai and Lord Haohan were easy to deal with. They weren't overconfident like Taoists. They knew how to judge the situation, and they knew how to grasp people's hearts. They would reveal their hostility and put themselves on a high pedestal. Thus they would be cautious and think carefully. Once they were smarter than them, these things wouldn't be a problem. But like the person in front of him, he was the lifeless immortal Gates ancestor. In this world he could be considered one of the top figures. But in front of him he showed a modest face, and when he spoke there was not a trace of anger. It was as if she was the master and he was the servant. This kind of person who couldn't be seen through and could put on a low profile was the most difficult to deal with. Thus, Li Yunxin became even more cautious. "I do have the intention to meet you." He did not ask himself to be as modest as the other, nor to show his hostility. "I can only hope that this will force you out. Because I feel that whether we become enemies or friends, it seems to only be a matter of a single thought." The old man listened attentively and leaned forward a little. She looked at him sincerely and put on a sincere expression. "Dragon King, you still don't trust me? Do you think that we, like those celestial sect of wonders in Moon and Ju, have our own intentions and use the Dragon King?" Li Yunxin smiled. "Who doesn't have their own intentions? So yes, it doesn't feel good to be a chess piece. Then," the old man rubbed his hands. "What if we are Dragon King's pawns?" Li Yunxin blinked. Dragon King is not the same as before," the old man said with a smile. Now who in the world dares to say that they can pinch Dragon King in their hands? They are either allies or enemies. Those who don't want to cause trouble for themselves will not blindly make enemies. On this point, aren't the two of us the same? Dragon King doesn't want to start a war with us carelessly. If we weren't forced to, what reason would we have to provoke Dragon King? This old man just wants to go back to land. This array in the vast sea is just for this one thing. Return to land and rebuild the orthodox celestial sect of wonders. What Dragon King wants to do in the sea has nothing to do with us. Not only does it have nothing to do with us, we can also help Dragon King on land. Li Yunxin raised his hand. Ancestor, you are a straightforward person. However, this attitude was a little too humble. It doesn't match your identity. I have doubts when I hear it. And, just to rebuild the orthodox Xian men. Li Yunxin sighed in a low voice and thought about the celestial beings. One day when you know what the so-called orthodox Xian men is, your mind may change and you will also want to participate in my affairs. The old man laughed. Dragon King wants to say that celestial beings are not gods. They are also human beings. This old man might have known about it earlier than you, Dragon King. Li Yunxin was stunned. Then he frowned and looked at him. What did you say? Dragon King should also know. Otherwise, why is he so determined to get the Dragon Island? The Dragon Island is related to celestial beings, right? The old man winked at Li Yunxin like an old urchin. In these days we have controlled the Dragon Island, but we have not done anything. Dragon King should also know that what I said is true. We really have no interest in what Dragon King wants to do. Otherwise, why not seize the Dragon Island? Countless thoughts flashed through Li Yunxin's mind. The 10,000-year-old ancestor was said to have a lifespan of 40,000 years, and now he said such shocking words. What do you know? Li Yunxin blurted out. Celestial beings are not gods, they are humans. The old man said with a smile. His expression seemed to have seen through the vicissitudes of the world, and now he had also seen through it. It is true that they pass down the law of the will of heaven. But, they are just a little stronger. Dragon King said that if I know what the orthodox Xian men is, my mind will change. There was nothing wrong with what he said. When I first guessed this, I did have other thoughts. But after 40,000 years, I slowly understood. The old man stroked his beard. Celestial beings are humans, they are gods, it doesn't matter. At that time they passed down the law to shepherd the people. Whether this is true or not, it doesn't matter. Since there are demons causing trouble in this world and since the common people live hard lives, there should always be someone in charge of the rules and give them a piece of paradise. In the past, the Xian men did not do well. I want to do this properly. It is only related to the common people of the world. It has nothing to do with whether the celestial beings are real or not. That is why I said it has nothing to do with what Dragon King wants to do. That is why I said that perhaps we are Dragon King's pawns. What you want to do concerns the secret of the heavenly path, the rise and fall. But this old man, just want to do something for the world. You are the emperors, generals, and ministers who perform on stage. We only want to be the people below. Li Yunxin's brows furrowed tightly. He could understand what this 10,000-year-old ancestor meant. When he was still in the Qin kingdom, he was a pawn in the game. And the people who controlled him, the Xinryu, Munanju, and the Xianmen, were all fighting because of the power of the world. At that time, in his eyes, it was indeed like what this old man said, emperors, generals, and ministers performing on stage. At that time, those things were not something he could participate in. He could only watch and had no intention of participating. After experiencing many hardships and twists and turns, he was now standing on the stage. But it was also now that the power struggles between the Xianmen, the dragons, and the demons, things that were once unattainable in his eyes, had become small things that he could look down on. Now his goal was even bigger, the truth and secret of this world. The meaning of this 10,000-year-old ancestor's words was that he was thinking about the small things that Li Yunxin was looking down on. Perhaps he knew something about what Li Yunxin wanted to do, but he was not interested. But how did he know? He seemed to have seen through Li Yunxin's thoughts. This 10,000-year-old ancestor laughed again. I was originally just a cultivator. The cultivators in this world were born and raised by their parents. I can't compare to Dragon King. People like you are born with magic and are destined to do great things. As long as I do something for the people under the clouds, I will be able to live up to my original intention of cultivation. What do you know? Li Yunxin realized that tonight, This 10,000-year-old ancestor in front of him might be another way to get information. He stared at him. Have you really lived for 40,000 years? 40,000 years is a long time. I can't remember how many years it has been. The old man leaned forward as he spoke. I heard that Dragon King obtained a lot of treasures in Cloud Mountain. Don't you have a picture album of Xuanmen's patriarchs and patriarchs? Look at me, don't I look familiar? Li Yunxin widened his eyes and stared at him. Of course he had the picture album of the patriarchs and patriarchs. He had seen it not long ago. Xiaxing told him that the bodies of the saints of Xianmen were eventually taken by the celestial beings. At that time he had looked through the saint who was possessed by Gong Di. Therefore he had seen the faces of all the saints. His memory was amazing. He had an impression of almost all of them. Although there was no way to draw them out of thin air, if this 10,000-year-old ancestor meant that he was also in the portrait, he should be able to remember him as soon as he saw him. But after looking at it for a while he still had no impression. So he shook his head. You are not in the portrait album of the saints of Xianmen. The old man was stunned when he heard this. Then he sighed. Alas, so that's what happened. They only recorded the saints. He sighed and shook his head repeatedly. What a pity, what a pity. At that time, there were no saints. The mysterious realm was already amazing. I was thinking that I could also show my face in the album. After he said this, Li Yunxin realized that this 10,000-year-old ancestor's claim to have lived for more than 40,000 years was very likely to be true. When he first entered Cloud Mountain, Su Yusong pretended to be courteous with him. At that time he had told him a secret of the past, the origins of the Black and White Yama Lords. It mentioned that more than 40,000 years ago, the cultivation method passed down by the celestial beings had not been completed. There was no Grand Supreme in the Xianmen, and the highest cultivation level was only the mysterious realm. Among them, there were 2 mysterious realm cultivators who received the cultivation method from the celestial beings in their dreams. They cultivated according to the cultivation method, but they were possessed by the devil. They were besieged by the Xianmen and died. After their death they turned to the ghost path. In order to obtain a large number of souls, they stirred up turmoil in the world. Then the 2 ghost cultivators disappeared. After that, Black Bai Yanjun appeared in the world. If what this 10,000-year-old ancestor said was true, he should know. At that time, there was no Black Bai Yanjun. The old man sighed with emotion. Chapter 719. Li Yunxin heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Sure enough, the other party said those words. He was now a little convinced that the 10,000-year-old ancestor in front of him had lived for more than 40,000 years. But as soon as he said that, the translucent body of the old man suddenly flickered. Li Yunxin immediately activated his demon power, fearing that the other party was going to play some tricks. But then he heard a cry coming from the ocean. Damn it, it's hard, it's really hard. A black light came from afar, penetrated through the window and condensed into a human figure on the ground. The demonic wind swept through the room. Fortunately, there were no decorations, otherwise it would be a mess. Of course, it was Emperor Li who was acting in such a manner. The black-robed ghost emperor shouted as soon as he saw Li Yunxin. Brother Li, I need your help this time. That formation is difficult to deal with. As he spoke, he looked around. These days, Li Yunxin lived a leisurely life and made some snacks that he liked. Emperor Li enjoyed all the glory and wealth when he was alive. As he said, he was tired of men and women, so he was interested in wonderful people like Qin Jun. It was the same for food. After tasting Li Yunxin's cooking a few times, he was also interested. Every time he came, he would first look for something new. It was like a child who ran out, and when he was tired he would come back home to eat and drink. After eating and drinking he would go out again. Only then did he see the 10,000-year-old ancestor opposite Li Yunxin. He was stunned and stared. Who is this old thing? The old man smiled, slightly left his seat and cupped his hands at him, not putting on any airs at all. Anyone who saw him would not think that he was the 10,000-year-old ancestor of the lifeless immortal sect. What Li Yunxin wanted to ask was interrupted by Emperor Li, but he was not in a hurry. He thought for a moment and said to Emperor Li with a smile, "It's also troublesome for me to ask for help. But the person in front of Brother Ji is a great person. You can get twice the result with half the effort." Emperor Li stared at the old man. "You? Who are you?" The patriarch also smiled. I've lived on the sea for a long time, so I know a thing or two about that formation. But to solve your problem, there's no hurry. Since you've come from the mainland, I'd like to ask about the situation there first. Emperor Li turned to look at Li Yunxin and frowned. According to Li Yunxin's understanding of him these days, he should be asking, this old man is so long-winded, but does he really have a solution? Do you want me to kill him first? He spread his hands and said, I want to hear it too. Brother, don't be anxious. Tell me. The Emperor Li was full of doubts, not knowing what these two were up to. But from the first time he saw Li Yunxin, he felt that this kid was to his liking. Thus, he used some of his precious patience and turned to glare at the 10,000-year ancestor. If you had been so long-winded in front of me, I would have killed you. After saying this, he angrily grabbed a stool and sat down. He waved his hand and frowned. What do you want to hear? What was so nice about it? Are people dying on the continent? So many people have died. The patriarch blinked and said, well, what's the situation of Xianmen now? Emperor Li sneered, Xianmen? Ah, those stinky Taoists are all dead. This ghost emperor probably did not master the ability to communicate well with people when he was alive. So it was very difficult for him to ask questions. But this 10,000-year ancestor had lived for more than 40,000 years after all, and his speaking skills were also brilliant. He smiled and coaxed him with a kind face, and in the end he managed to get a lot of information. After a while he did get a lot of information out of him. Li Yunxin slowly drank tea on the side, watching these two people communicate. He was also interested in the current situation on the continent. Secondly, he wanted to know why this 10,000-year ancestor was asking these questions. Was it really as he said that he cared about the lives on the continent and nothing else? After listening to Emperor Li for a while, he also slowly put down the teacup in his hand. Before, he had thought that the continent would not be peaceful, but he did not expect it to be so peaceful. He once told Lu Gongzan that once Xianmen fell, all kinds of monster kings would definitely appear in the world. Those monster kings had a large number of monster soldiers under their command, and without the control of the cultivators, it would be a terrible scene where they ate the cities and blood flowed everywhere. But under the Cloud Mountain, more than half of the monsters on the continent died. Therefore, the situation should not be as terrible as he had imagined. Few monsters survived, and the Midland was vast and sparsely populated, so the situation might be more optimistic. But the world that Emperor Li talked about seemed to be even more terrible than he had expected. It should be known that the change of dynasties and wars should be the normal state of the world. The big nobles had the power, and in this era they also had the wealth. People's desires were endless, and the nobles would also reproduce from generation to generation. After giving birth to children, they would be promoted to nobility, and they would also need to enjoy wealth. In this world, land was the foundation of wealth. Therefore, just like the dynasties in the world that Li Yunxin came from, more and more poor people would lose their land. What they lost would be concentrated in the hands of the nobles. Therefore, the number of poor people would increase, and the land available for them to live and work would become less and less. If a large-scale war could happen, it could also cause a great loss of population. But under the protection of Xianmen, there would at most be small conflicts between countries and wars would not happen. Therefore, the irreconcilable conflicts would become more and more serious. When these conflicts became serious enough, a dynasty should be overthrown. In the process of overthrowing the dynasty, many people would die and a lot of land would be emptied. The survivors would get the land and gradually settle down to recuperate, and then another rule of the world would begin. Until there were more and more nobles in this dynasty and more land annexation, the world would be in chaos again and another dynasty would appear. But in this world there was no such solution. When the conflicts intensified to an unsolvable level, and the world should be in turmoil, Xianmen would use a strong and powerful hand to suppress the turmoil. When Li Yunxin was in the kingdom of Qing, he felt that the environment of the kingdom of Qing was not much different from the ancient dynasties in the history of his world. This was because the kingdom of Qing had been founded hundreds of years ago, and had experienced a rare war, so it could be considered a young country. But in other countries, the 1,000 years of peace that people talked about was not a good thing. Those who could speak were the upper class of this world, and they could not see the suffering of the common people. In places where the glorious light had not yet arrived, a large number of poor people lived in darkness. Even in a prosperous place like the city of Wei of the kingdom of Qing, every year when the snow fell hundreds of people would die, not to mention other places. The undercurrent had long been surging. It was just that in the past it had been forcefully covered and suppressed so it looked good. But Xianmen had fallen. Once the hand covering the lid disappeared, the royal power of the secular world could not resist the tide that had accumulated for thousands of years. In almost a month, the fires of war were ignited in the Midland. Every country had a large-scale peasant uprising without exception. The madness and anger of the oppressed was not something a normal person could imagine. The revolutionary army formed by these people, everywhere they went, not a blade of grass grew, and anyone who had been famous or held an official position was tortured to death. Actually, at this time, it was hard to say who deserved it. After the oppressed came to power, their behavior was no different from the oppressors. They were, after all, only human. If it was only a war between humans, it would be fine. But now there were many demons in the world without restraint. At first, the demons did kill and eat people as Li Yunxin had expected. But now people were also in a killing frenzy. Everywhere there were armed revolutionary armies and official armies. The powerful demons with terrifying magical powers were fine, but the small demons could not be as happy in front of these humans as before. In the past, the small demons were stronger than humans and had terrifying appearances. If they had some magical powers, they could make the common people panic and let them be slaughtered. But now, seeing that there were more and more demons, people were not as afraid as before. Even though the small demons had sharp teeth, they were not as good as the big knives and spears. An emptiness state or transcendent state demon would not be able to do anything against hundreds or thousands of human soldiers, and might even die. Therefore, after the first good days, their bad days came. Many people believed that eating the demon's flesh could also give them divine power or ward off evil spirits. Therefore, both sides became prey and hunters. Li Yunxin knew about this. To quickly destroy something, humans only needed to believe that it was edible, delicious, and nourishing yin and yang, and strengthening one's body. What happened next would evolve into a situation of, even if it was a god, he would eat it for you to see. As for the powerful demons, humans could not deal with them, but there were cultivators from the Xianmen sect and the wandering souls of the Freemasons. At the foot of Cloud Mountain, a considerable number of cultivators fled after realizing that the two sages had been replaced. Some hid from the world, while others tried to establish their own inheritance in the mortal world. And the wandering souls of the Freemasons were abandoned by the elders, and became the new Freemasons. These people were actually in a similar situation as the 10,000-year ancestor said. They did not know what the truth was. In their eyes, there was only the Midland and the human world. They thought that this world would last forever, so they worked hard and struggled for what they could get. They were born human beings, and at this time they joined the human side. In this chaotic world, they fought against the demons together, showed their powers, and quickly gathered a large number of believers. In this way, the powers that were suppressed by the Xianmen sect and had to hide in the shadows of the human world were all unscrupulously displayed. In Dongting, Li Yunxin had seen the power of a Xianmen sect cultivator. Kun Wuzi turned 1,000 miles of water upside down with a single move. He had also seen the power of a true realm cultivator. The leader of the Danding sect of the Xianxia sect killed all living creatures in the lake with a poisonous pill. Now these powers were unrestrained. Li Yunxin could imagine how much damage they could cause. Almost every cultivator above the true realm was a nuclear bomb that could be used many times within a short period of time. Therefore, within 2 months, the population of the Midland was reduced by 60%. Currently, the number of ghosts in the Midland might be more than the number of living people. Otherwise, the Li Emperor wouldn't have hundreds of thousands of ghost armies, and every single one of them was a ghost who was still resentful because they died in vain. Hearing this, the 10,000-year-old ancestor paused for a while. Then he sighed. It has reached this stage. Has it reached this stage? Li Yunxin looked at him and said, from what Qin Fengzi said, I feel that your sect is not completely ignorant about what is happening in the Midland. It seems that you also have some spies on the land. Didn't you know about the current situation? We do have spies. The 10,000-year-old ancestor sighed. But Dragon King should know. Those with high cultivation can't go to the land to be spies. Although the Midland is vast, it is controlled by the Xianmen sect. A cultivator who doesn't belong to the Xianmen sect is so eye-catching. Therefore only some disciples travel on the land. But the things they know can't be compared with what you know. Either they know the big picture or they only know the situation in one place. Neither is systematic. Li Yunxin nodded understandingly. Then he sighed. From the looks of it, I also have a part to play in this disaster. Emperor Li snorted. What kind of disaster is this? When I was still the emperor, I wanted to expand the territory, but those stinky Taoist priests suppressed me. We have over 100 million people in the Li kingdom, but we have an army of 800,000. Brother Li, think about it. Since I can't use my army against the outside world, why do I have to raise so many people? Because I don't need to use my army against the outside world, but I need to use my army against the inside world. Without these 800,000 soldiers, I'm afraid the mobs would have already broken into my golden palace. When I die, well, when I walk around the country, everyone cries. Listen carefully, what are they crying about? They are crying that I didn't die earlier. Damn it, he spat on the ground. Do I want them to starve and freeze to death? I want to be a wise emperor. But how? If I can use my army against the outside world and swallow all those Qinguiyang countries, do they still need to starve and freeze? Bah. It's all because of those stinky Taoist priests. You did a great job on Mount Yunshan. Those stinky Taoist priests were scared witless and the world was in chaos. Killing and killing, killing and killing. After the chaos, everything will be fine. Who didn't build their achievements on bones? Right now, I have hundreds of thousands of ghost soldiers and none of them need to eat. After we take down that formation, sweep the sea and find that ancestor 10,000 years, this will be the ghost kingdom. In the future we will capture all those who did evil things before they died. I will also satisfy the craving of those stinky Taoist priests, and become a wise emperor who rewards the good and punishes the evil. You have such an ambition. Ancestor 10,000 years was surprised for the first time. Are you speaking from the heart? Emperor Li frowned and looked at him. Who the hell are you, old thing? Dare you ask me if I'm telling the truth? Li Yunxin shook his head and smiled. Brother Ji, I told you. The man in front of you is the master of the lifeless immortal sect. Ancestor 10,000 years. The grand formation that stumped you is his. Emperor Li's eyes widened. He looked at Li Yunxin, then at Ancestor 10,000 years and shouted, What the hell? You two teamed up to trick me? Chapter 720. Brother, don't be impatient. We were having a friendly discussion before, but you came here halfway. Li Yunxin said with a smile. I think since you are here, why don't the three of us talk together? This 10 millennium-old ancestor. He looked at the old man. He said he did not want to get involved in the fight between me and the Shinryu, and only wanted to return to the land to save the world. Brother Ji, now that we know the situation on the land, what do you think? Emperor Li looked at Li Yunxin and the old man suspiciously, then stared at the 10 millennium-old ancestor. You are the one in the Ruoxue? The old man nodded with a smile. Then where did you come from? Have you really lived for more than 40,000 years? Perhaps it was because of the obsession of the ghost cultivators. From the moment they met, Emperor Li was obsessed with the identity and origin of the old man. If it was Li Yunxin who asked about these things, the old man might have given a perfunctory answer. But since it was Emperor Li who asked, there probably would not be a chance for him to evade. This was also the situation that Li Yunxin was happy to see. Emperor Li was the good guy and he was the good guy. This brother Ji came at the right time. Perhaps the old man realized this, or perhaps he did not want to hide it. He sighed with emotion. Yes. It has been more than 40,000 years since I came from Yunshan to Ruoxue. You used to be a cultivator of Xianmen? Li Yunxin asked. Yes. The old man looked at him with a smile. Speaking of which, I and the Dragon King are fated. More than 40,000 years ago I was the guru of the Langya Grotto heaven. Oh. Li Yunxin gently shook his head. Then I have a lot of contact with your descendants. The 10 millennium-old ancestor waved his hand. Let's not talk about it. Both of you are quick-witted people. What this old man said doesn't conflict with the two of you. You should be skeptical. So I'll tell you everything. You'll be able to tell if I'm being perfunctory. If you think what I said is true, then things will be much easier. I used to be called Shinichi. Li Yunxin exhaled softly. I'm all ears. At that time the cultivation technique passed down by the Deva was not complete, and no one had cultivated to the Grand Supreme realm. But in reality, how was it just incomplete? Now that I think about it, there are still many mistakes and omissions in many cultivation methods. At that time cultivators practiced very hard. Even if they wholeheartedly followed the heavenly will righteous method, it was very likely that they would suffer from qi deviation. Thus there were very few cultivators with high realms. Profound realm cultivators are as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. True realm cultivators are rare as well. Transcendent realm cultivators can be considered experts. I guess that the flaws in those cultivation methods are due to the celestial beings. Perhaps when they created the cultivation methods, they were also exploring. Since it was a grope, it would never be the truth. But the celestials called themselves gods. How could gods be wrong? As a result, those cultivators who had fallen into the devil's path were denounced as having an improper heart. Or it could be said that they had altered their divine arts without permission, which resulted in this terrible consequence. Therefore, after that, the vast majority of the cultivation techniques with loopholes were sealed as forbidden techniques or evil arts. There are also some that have been corrected and are still in use today. When my people were on the mainland, they would sometimes obtain some basic cultivation methods of the Xianmen. I have read them all. Some of them were indeed improved from the foundation of my cultivation methods at that time. There were also some cultivation methods with loopholes because they were really not very profound, they did not even have the value to be sealed, so they were discarded. Most of the superficial cultivation methods practiced by the wild Taoists on the mainland today were passed down from generation to generation among the people. Li Yunqin nodded thoughtfully. He was very interested in the words of this 10,000-year-old ancestor. But Emperor Li did not know as much about the past as he did, and he was also not interested in exploring the truth. Therefore after a while he could not sit still. He said to Li Yunqin, "Call me when you reach the key point." Then he turned into a black wind and flew away. But he did not know that every word and every expression of this 10,000-year-old ancestor was key point to Li Yunqin. "Ancestor, please continue." Li Yunqin made up a pot of tea and handed it to him. The old man took it but did not drink it. He held the teapot in both hands and placed it on his lap, sighing comfortably, like an old man warming himself with a hand stove. He was indeed the most human-like cultivator that Li Yunqin had ever seen. My talent was considered outstanding in the past. At that time in our Langya cave, there were 3 people with the surname Zhen. Apart from me there were Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuxia. The 3 of us were in the profound realm. But my talent could not be compared to the 2 of them. It took me more than 700 years to reach the profound realm, but the 2 of them only used more than 400 years. Regardless of appearance or temperament, they were much better than me. But the previous generation's headmaster thought that I had a lot of experience and was steady, so he passed the position to me. In fact, I was not steady at all. It was just that at that time, the tribulation was no longer interesting and I was not interested in anything. So after more than 100 years, I found out that the 2 junior Marshall brothers have been holding a grudge against the previous generation's passing of the position to me. Actually, it was not because they wanted power, but because they wanted to improve. At that time there were no grand saints, and the important matters of the profound gate were decided by the headmasters of the 36 heavenly caves. The cultivation methods passed down by the Deva also reached our hands first. Because in the past, when there were mistakes in the cultivation methods, we would first gather in one place to study it, and when we felt that there were no mistakes, we would pass it down. In this way, no matter what, when we cultivate, we would be faster than others. Things like cultivation methods cannot be thoroughly studied in a day or 2. If it was short, it would take dozens of years. If it was long, it would take hundreds of years. Because of this, the 2 of them were unsatisfied. They told me many times that they wanted to study the new cultivation method with me. But at that time my mind was muddled. How could I understand their intentions? I did not take it to heart. So the 2 of them began to look up those forbidden books. The reason why the forbidden books are forbidden is because they are powerful and at the same time they are flawed. But in the end they were passed down by the Deva, and there are still many areas where they can be used. The 2 of them wanted to find their own way from the forbidden books, and find a way to speed up their cultivation. Actually, according to the Profound Gate's words, this kind of thinking is already being possessed by the devil. However, the 2 of them were heaven-gifted geniuses after all. They actually managed to study something. In the next 400 years, their cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds, and they did not undergo any more tribulations. They actually almost reached the peak of the profound realm. Hearing this, Li Yunqin's heart stirred. That day at the foot of Little Cloud Mountain, Zhou Xian said that the two cultivators who turned into ghost cultivators 40,000 years ago were at the peak of the profound realm at that time. Perhaps the 10,000-year-old ancestor was talking about those two. But he did not say anything. He hoped to verify what Zhou Xian had said with what the old man had said, to see if there were any omissions in what the old man had said. Almost reaching the peak of the profound realm. This is something that has never happened in the profound gate since ancient times. We, the 36 headmasters, were suspicious, but we did not have any evidence, so we could not say anything, nor could we do anything. So, one day, Xianxia and Wuxia claimed that they received the cultivation method from the Deva in their dreams. They said that the reason why our cultivation stagnated was because of the Deva's test. The Deva wanted to find two intelligent people, top-notch people, and then pass on the powerful and profound cultivation method to them. From then on, they would lead the profound gate and pass on the cultivation method. When this was said, we did not believe it at first. But the Deva called themselves gods and we could not communicate with them. It was always the Deva who gave the decree. We did not have the right to ask for the decree. We could not come up with a plan for the time being, so Xianxia and Wuxia ignored us. They only said that they had to cultivate according to the method passed on by the Deva, and when they had cultivated to perfection they would pass it on to us. But it was also said before that the new law might have some omissions. According to previous experience, the greater the power, the more likely it was to make mistakes. I've mentioned this to my two junior brothers, but they only thought that I wanted a share of the loot. Alas, they didn't tell me anything in the end. After another 200 years, as expected, there were omissions in the new law. Xianxia and Wuxia went into chi deviation. Considering that we were from the same sect, we surrounded the two of them with a formation, wanting them to tell us the cultivation method passed on by the Deva in their dreams. We wanted to see where the mistakes were, thinking that we might be able to fix it. But at that time, the demons in their hearts were burning, and they only thought that we were coveting their cultivation method, so they fought. It took nearly 4 years to kill the two of them in the end. But more than 20 of the 36 Grotto Heavens sect masters died. It could be said that the casualties were heavy. But the two of them actually turned to the ghost Tao, and they even used the so-called cultivation method passed on by the Deva. So the two of them incited the emperors of the mortal world to fight endlessly, and they also wantonly killed. Many dead souls were not collected. They were all refined by the two of them. We tried to encircle the two of them again, but the two of them were more than several times stronger than when they were alive. According to today's standards, they were almost too high. We failed to encircle them and they almost killed their way up to Cloud Mountain. We were at our wits' end, but we caused trouble in Cloud Mountain again. Xianxia and Wuxia were both my junior brothers. We were from the same sect. I don't know who said that I also had the cultivation method that they cultivated. If we wanted to subdue the two of them, we had to obtain the divine cultivation method first. So they forced me to hand over the divine cultivation method. The old man stopped here and gently rubbed the teapot in his hand as if he was feeling emotional. After a while he sighed, "But I don't have any divine cultivation method. Sigh, now that I think about the situation back then, it can't be considered an undeserved disaster. So many people died, but I was the only one who said that the two of them might be saved, and that there was no need to kill them. Maybe it was just a momentary loss. The Deva would not let such a situation go. Probably because of these words, they thought that I was hiding something. So we fought again in Cloud Mountain. If the previous 35 sect masters were still around, I probably would not have been able to escape death. But at that time they were either dead or injured, and because I did not use my full strength when I encircled my two junior brothers, I ended up in one piece. So I luckily escaped from Cloud Mountain. Chapter 721. But my two junior brothers were already possessed and were hunting down cultivators outside Cloud Mountain. How would I dare to stay on land? So I went all the way to the sea. Just as I was about to reach the East Sea, I ran into Wuxia again. One chased and one fled all the way to the end of the ocean. I had no choice but to escape into the Ruoshui. Li Yunxi nodded. There is indeed no other place to go. But he realized that this 10,000-year-old ancestor did not elaborate on what happened in Cloud Mountain back then. He said that it was because I said some good things to the two possessed junior brothers, causing them to suspect me. If it was a group of mortals, this would make sense. But at that time in Cloud Mountain should be the elites of Taoist sect. These elites knew cultivation. Could it be that he was the only one who could see that the two people might be saved? There must be a hidden story. But now was not a good time to ask about it. So Li Yunxin temporarily kept his doubts in mind. You should have heard that the Ruoshui can prohibit divine power. The 10,000-year-old ancestor said in a low voice. Going deeper into the Ruoshui, the divine power will gradually fade. At that time Zhen Wuxi's cultivation was far higher than mine. I only hoped that the Ruoshui could make him retreat. But my junior brother, perhaps because of an old grudge, did not let go. I could only go further and further. My divine power weakened. Zhen Wuxi's divine power also weakened. When he felt that there was no way to leave the Ruoshui, he stopped chasing and turned back. But at that time I could not return. There is something in the Ruoshui that can slowly prohibit demonic power and spiritual power. It is not that the further you go, the stronger the power of the restriction. It is actually the same. It is just that the power of the restriction slowly seeps into the body. In fact, the longer you stay in the Ruoshui, the weaker your divine power. At that time, if I turned back, I would definitely lose all my spiritual power before leaving the Ruoshui and sink to the bottom of the sea. The Ruoshui cannot carry anything. I might have to walk thousands of miles underwater to return to the ocean. Actually, this is not unacceptable. But when I was in a dilemma, I saw an island in the Ruoshui. Li Yunxin said softly. Is it the current lifeless immortal sex encampment in the Ruoshui? Exactly. Then if it's not convenient to go into detail, Patriarch, please skip it. The old man shook his head. There's nothing I can't say. The island in the Ruoshui River was no ordinary island, just like Penglai, Fenghu and Yingzhou. His position was uncertain. Dragon King might not be able to find it even if he wanted to. When I got on the island, I wanted to rest for a while before making a decision. But this rest lasted for several months. The island was huge, but there was nothing on it. It was as smooth as a mirror and as hard as iron. I took a few months off to understand one thing. It's hard for me to return to the celestial sect of wonders. When I escaped from the Cloud Mountain, I killed a lot of people, so there must be hatred between us. I'm afraid that at that time, in their eyes, I've also become a devil, just like Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuxi. But Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuxi know that I entered the Ruoshui. Perhaps they are waiting for me outside. If I go out, wouldn't I be courting death? Also, I was already 2,600 years old at that time. I was in the mysterious Shi realm. It was rare for me to live to 2,600 years old. If my cultivation base didn't improve, it would only take me a few decades to reach immortalization. Thinking about it this way, I felt that there was nothing to miss on the continent. As for the Devis, my two junior martial brothers almost killed their way to the Cloud Mountain, but they still didn't show up. For the first time I had doubts about them. So, I decided to wait for death on this island. And I waited, for more than 100 years. The 10,000-year patriarch smiled. Dragon King, do you know why it's difficult for profound realm cultivators to live more than 3,000 years? Because there's too much spiritual qi. Li Yunxin had thought about this question before. So now he answered smoothly. The speed of body refinement can't keep up with the speed of spiritual qi. The meridians of profound realm cultivators are constantly adjusting their breathing. The only way to stop this is to disperse their cultivation base. But who would destroy their ocean of qi and mountain of snow to survive after reaching the profound realm? There's no chance for them to cultivate from the beginning. That's right. The 10,000-year patriarch nodded. I only have a few decades left in my lifespan. But I lived for 100 years. And I feel more and more clear-headed. Thinking back to the days of cultivation, I was shocked to realize that I had cultivated a living person into a muddle-headed state. From this moment on, I realized for the first time that there might be a problem with the cultivation method passed down by the Devis. 40,000 years after me, the cultivators probably didn't have this kind of thought, because the heavenly heart technique has been perfected day by day and there are very few omissions. And people's abandonment of lust is also a gradual process. When they give up some things in their hearts, their bodies will become stronger. The two affect each other and wash away their doubts. Alas. In fact, it's not only cultivators like this but also mortals. Using the things in one's heart to exchange for power or glory. The principle of the world is the same. In short, I guess it's because the Ruoshui sealed off my spiritual power. Since spiritual qi can't continue to fill my body, I naturally won't die. The body of a profound realm cultivator is almost indestructible. This body won't deteriorate. But at this time I can't leave the Ruoshui even if I want to. Leaving the Ruoshui is tantamount to dying for me. So that's how you lived for 40,000 years. Li Yunxin let out a light breath. So that's how it is. Then it's also because of Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuzi that the Xianmen later forbade cultivators from cultivating the ghost Dao after death. Then the two of them later. The old man waved his hand. No hurry. Later, since I knew that I wouldn't die and my mind gradually became clear, I wanted to do something. I thought about all the things that the Xianmen had done in the past. Although it said that they shepherded tens of thousands of people, when did they care about the lives and deaths of tens of thousands of people? There was no real pity in my heart, I just acted according to instinct. I wanted to do something. First, I had to pass on my understanding and experience. When I killed my way out of Cloud Mountain, I had some magic treasures with me. They could let me leave that island and there was a way to find my way back. Without the Ruoshui, I can still live for a few more decades. If I use it slowly, I can also do a lot of things. So I plan to find a successor. There are no people in the depths of the ocean, so I looked for demons. I found a few that I liked and brought them back to the Ruoshui to slowly train them. In this Ruoshui, I have the body of a mysterious realm, no one can harm me. After another few hundred years, I've finally managed to train a few suitable ones. But they couldn't cultivate in the Ruoshui, so they could only go to the ocean. My lifeless immortal sect said that I had a lot of spies in the 9 seas. But in fact it was mostly for cultivation. My sect gradually flourished and I had people to use so I could send them to the land to gather information. It was at that time that I found out that Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuzi had actually disappeared from the world. At that time nearly 1,000 years had passed. Those people 1,000 years ago, some died and some were injured. In addition, the Xianmen were afraid that the future generations would imitate my 2 junior brothers to become ghost cultivators, so they deliberately covered up what happened that year and in the end almost no one knew. After that, there was Black Bai Yanjun in the world. Black Bai Yanjun is Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuzi. Li Yunxin asked. I'm not sure. The old man shook his head. I can only say it's possible. Li Yunxin was silent for a while. So you said that the Celestials are just people with a bit more power. Just because there was an oversight in the cultivation method they passed down before? Not just that. The old man was in a daze for a while. He then rubbed the teapot for a while. Later, my mind gradually became clear, and I recalled the situation when I received the celestial decree. When I was the sect leader, I received the decree 3 times. At that time I was muddle-headed, and only felt that the voice of the Celestials in my dreams was incomparably majestic, and I couldn't have any disrespectful thoughts. But later when I gradually became clear-headed and recalled that time, it felt different. How different? That voice was not majestic. The old man spoke slowly as if he was thinking while speaking. Instead it should be incomparable anger and pain. Because of what pain I don't know, but I feel that the anger was towards us. They were angry that our cultivation was too slow. In nearly 10,000 years, we have only cultivated a dozen mysterious realms. Li Yunxin nodded silently. Xiaxing said that the Celestials asked people to cultivate to the Taishang level just to get their bodies. The deduction of the 10,000-year ancestor and Xiaxing corroborated each other. He indeed spoke the truth, at least what he said should be the truth. It was not his fault for being suspicious. It was just that he had always been in the midst of treacherous schemes, and was really afraid of being schemed against. It was impossible for him to completely trust anyone so easily. Then what else? And what do you mean by, you think they are people? Because I've seen something out of the ordinary. The 10,000-year ancestor looked at Li Yunxin and said in a deep voice, it was also because of that matter that I knew that Dragon Island is not just a simple residence of Shinryu. It has another great use. It also let me know why the Celestials set up the profound ancestral court on Cloud Mountain. In fact, they wanted us to guard it. Guard what? Cloud Mountain itself. What is the unusual matter? The 10,000-year ancestor laughed. Dragon King must have heard of the Netherworld. You should also have heard that the entrance to the Netherworld is on Dragon Island. He pointed to himself. This statement was spread by me. Li Yunxin suddenly frowned. It was you who spread the false news? Haha. Dragon King is too suspicious. The 10,000-year ancestor waved his hand, motioning him to calm down. The news is not false. But my deduction. I originally did not want to spread it. But Dragon King should know one thing. Tens of thousands of years. Even if only a few people know, there will always be a time when it is accidentally leaked. And I originally did not intend to let it rot in my stomach. I have discussed it with a few proud disciples. Perhaps one of them had intentionally or unintentionally leaked the information. What I saw at that time could be called a glimpse of a leopard through a tube. After so many years, I also feel that my guess is correct. That matter happened about 40,000 years ago. At that time, I had already stayed in the Ruo Shui for more than 2,000 years. Chapter 722. The 10,000-year-old ancestor seemed to be preparing to talk about some important matters of the past. This was also what Li Yunxin wanted to know. Even if he couldn't completely believe the words of this old ancestor, he had to admit that this person in front of him seemed to be the one who understood the truth the most out of all the people he could come into contact with. But he naturally couldn't let down his guard completely. Because this old ancestor came at the right time. If he showed up earlier, his understanding of certain matters was not that deep. These words of his would not attract too much interest. If he showed up later, he might have already confirmed a lot of information through other channels. It would become the icing on the cake. But it just had to be at this time before going to the Dragon Island. What the old ancestor said was related to the Dragon Island. It could let him figure out what the Dragon Island was for. It could be said to be delivering charcoal in the snow. But on the other hand, if he really had ulterior motives, choosing to say it at this time was really too obvious. It was hard to see through the intentions of the old ancestor with just these inferences. All he could do was to listen quietly for now. So Li Yunxin raised his hand, hinting him to speak later. Then he used his divine ability to attach a layer of restriction on the outside of the room. This restriction could protect the two of them from being disturbed by external forces for the time being. As for the great sage in his ears, he didn't seem to care about these matters. The state of mind of a great sage was hard to understand. It wasn't something that ordinary people could speculate about. Just like Li Yunxin a year ago, how could he guess the thoughts of today's Li Yunxin? After doing all this, he nodded to the old man in front of him. There are no people who are listening now. Old ancestor, tell me in detail. The old man smiled. Dragon King is so serious, I'm afraid I'll disappoint you. I still haven't completely understood what I saw at that time. Some of them might even be regarded as nonsense by Dragon King. Does Dragon King really want to listen? Is there a lack of things in this world that people can't understand? Li Yunxin smiled. Please speak. At that time, my lifeless immortal sect had already begun to take shape. I was no longer alone. There are a few disciples on the island, and they are all talented people that I have selected. Don't teach them spells and divine abilities first, but teach them how to be a person first. I named the island I was residing on as Lifeless Island. Because I entered the weak water, I felt that I was between life and death. Finding a way to live in a place where there was no way to live could be considered a joke of fate. The whereabouts of the lifeless island were uncertain, wandering in the Ruo River. Sometimes they almost wander to the ocean, and sometimes they run to the depths of the Ruoshui extreme. They might even lose contact with the magical weapons on the ocean. The lifeless island must be man-made. I once thought that there might be a pattern to follow, but after looking at it for more than 40,000 years, I actually didn't find any fixed pattern. That day was when the lifeless island was patrolling to the depths of the Ruoshui extreme. Usually at this time all you can see is a vast expanse of whiteness. The Ruoshui was similar to the sea. The deeper we go, the higher the temperature will be. The water vapor will evaporate and nothing will be visible. But that day the surface of the sea was clear and you could even see the bright moon in the sky. And it was not as hot as before. Li Yunxin understood that the depths of the Ruoshui extreme that the ancestor mentioned was not referring to the depth of the sea. It was referring to the depths of the Ruoshui extreme. It was the first time in the past 2,000 years that something abnormal happened. I had a premonition that something big might happen, so I paid extra attention. In the second half of the night, as expected, something happened. Something flew from the sky. It was unknown whether this 10,000-year-old ancestor had accepted Li Yunxin's request to talk about it in detail, or he really had a deep impression of it. Therefore, when he spoke of these matters, his words were vivid, as if he was telling a story, mentioning every detail. The disciples on the island were little demons that had just transformed. I couldn't see it. But I could see it clearly. That thing flew extremely high, reflecting the moonlight. At first I thought it was a flying star, but then I realized that flying stars don't move so slowly. So I kept staring. As I watched, I suddenly felt that the silhouette was familiar. It looked like the appearance of Xian. At first I suspected that it was someone from Xian who came here to kill me. But then I thought that even if it was someone from Xian, he wouldn't have any supernatural powers here. I've been here for 2,000 years, what's there to be afraid of? But not long after I thought of this, I noticed that there was movement on the sea. Just in the northeast I suddenly saw three things. I've been on the lifeless island for 2,000 years, and I've always thought that there might be more than one such island in the Wuxia extreme. At that time when I saw those three, I only thought that it should be other islands. But when I took a closer look, it's much bigger than my lifeless island. Those three islands, each one is a perfect circle. The islands are not as smooth as the lifeless island, but there are many high and low protrusions like mountain peaks. Although it looks messy, there's order in the messiness. Obviously it was arranged by someone. The islands are surrounded by some long and short stone pillars. Each of those stone pillars is as thick as a small island. But it's not that it's motionless, but it's moving up and down. At first glance it looks messy, but there should be some kind of rule. The Wuxia extreme forbids supernatural powers. This is the first time I've seen such a miraculous thing. But when I saw the three islands I was relieved. Xian shouldn't be coming for me but for the three islands. I looked up to the sky again. Sure enough, Xian flew to the northeast. Three big round islands with protrusions on the islands, surrounded by stone pillars. Xianxia couldn't help but say, "You mean, it's the three islands of Penglai, Yingzhou and Fenghu." Dragon King guessed it. The 10,000-year ancestor said in a deep voice, "People say that it's rare to see the immortal mountains on the sea. It's because the immortals on them use supernatural powers to hide their true forms. But in fact it's the same as my lifeless island, they're all patrolling the sea. But the lifeless island is in the Wuxia extreme, while the three islands are on the ocean." At that time when the three immortal mountains appeared, the water in the distance boiled. It was as if something was about to spurt out from under the sea. Now that I think about it, the scene at that time was also rare. The top of each peak of the three mountains was shining with white light, looking brighter than the sun. Those lights gathered together and the entire mountain was lit up. So there are three spots. Dragon King knew that the Xian was huge. The three spots of light on the three celestial mountains formed a triangle, which was large enough to contain the cloudy mountain. I used to live in the Xian. Xian flew around the midland in the sky and had never been to the sea before. So I thought that this Xian would fall into the sea. According to the legend, the Xian was man-made. I thought as long as it's man-made, it would need to be repaired and adjusted. Every hundreds of years, the Xian would fall to replenish some resources. Since it was replenishing, it should also be rectifying. Perhaps, this Xian was going to be rectified every 10,000 years. Now I can see it with my own eyes. Maybe I can even see the immortals. Then, what was the result? The Xian didn't fall. The 10,000-year ancestor said in a deep voice, "The Xian stopped above the three mountains. Then I saw the Dragon Island. It was right in the middle of the three mountains below the Xian. First there was a burst of light in the air, then a round silvery thing appeared in the air. The surface of the light was shining brightly, and the surroundings were also flashing with lightning. Once the Dragon Island appeared, the light spots on the three mountains gathered there. Then another light beam rose from the Dragon Island and hit the Xian in the sky." Xianxia raised his hand. "Wait. Let me ask a few questions." Although the 10,000-year ancestor tried to show all the details, after all he was a person of this era. Listening to his description, Xianxia's heart was already stirred. He could be sure that the so-called Xian on the sea, the Dragon Island, they didn't belong to this world. They should belong to Xiaxing's world. However, there were many things that the 10,000-year ancestor hadn't seen, and his description might not be accurate. For example, he definitely didn't know what lasers or other physical phenomena looked like. How did the ancestor know that was the Dragon Island? 2,000 years ago when the Shinryu appeared, the Dragon Island also appeared once. My disciples told me about the situation at that time, and it was almost exactly the same. I don't think there will be a second similar thing in this world. Then is the Dragon Island in the sky or on the water? It's between the 3 mountains. I understand. Li Yunxin nodded. Please continue, ancestor. The old man thought for a while, then said, at that time I thought that the 2 sides were fighting. The light beam that hit the Dragon Island and hit the Yunshan. The power contained in it is not something you and I can imagine. I was a profound realm cultivator in the past, but in front of that kind of power, I felt that I was not even an ant but a speck of dust. If this kind of power hit the Yunshan, wouldn't the Yunshan be torn apart? I was scared and looked up at the sky. I felt that the Yunshan had indeed cracked. A large amount of soil and rocks came crashing down like a rainstorm. Fortunately, my lifeless island was far away, so it didn't affect me. After a quarter of an hour, I realized that I was wrong. What came crashing down was the soil and rocks attached to the Yunshan. At first, we thought that this Yunshan was really a mountain. The Deva hollowed out the mountain and refined it with supernatural power so it was indestructible. But now, it was also shining and its surface was very smooth. It was made of the same material as the Dragon Island, the Immortal Mountain, and my lifeless island. The soil and rocks were either used to cover its true appearance, or because of the long years, the dust adhered to it. Li Yunxin took a deep breath and frowned slightly. So, it was like this. When he went deep into the Yunshan, he found that its internal structure was not what he had imagined. It was like there were countless huge pipes coiled inside, and inside the pipes were all kinds of plants, climate, and landforms that he had seen. At that time he was suspicious, and now he heard these things from the ancestor. Could it be that those were really pipes? Why did they make it like this? Then the entire space began to distort. The ancestor said in a deep voice, the Yunshan and the Dragon Island shone at the same time, and the sea surface was brighter than daytime. Most of my lifeless island is underwater. At that time the huge waves came one after another, covering the tracks of my island. In the void between the Dragon Island and the Yunshan, many things suddenly appeared. I recognized some of them. They were things from the Midland. Mountains, rivers, pavilions, birds, and some men and women in the mortal world. And there were people among them. But those people were wearing strange clothes and I had never heard of them before. The things around them were also strange and I couldn't understand them. Before, I said that the Deva should also be a human because I saw those things. Although I didn't recognize the strange things around those strange people, I could feel that they all had terrible power. I even saw a person fly up to the sky with the help of a magic weapon, and destroy the whole mountain in the blink of an eye. But that mountain didn't look like the mountains in the Midland, and it seemed to be millions of feet high. And I saw the astral world. The astral world was really the astral world. It was full of bright stars just like the night sky. But there was no land and no ocean and there was only void everywhere. Those Deva used the magic weapons to travel among the stars. Their magical powers were unimaginable. But what shocked me the most was, I saw the past and the future. The ancestor lowered his voice when he said this. It was as if the shock from what he had seen 40,000 years ago had not completely dissipated. Of course, these were all things that I slowly realized in the past 40,000 years. At that time, a lot of scenes were imprinted in my divine sense. I knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. What I saw might be of great use in the future, so I tried hard to remember it. In these 40,000 years, there were 3 things that corresponded with what I saw at that time. Then I realized that what those illusions showed at that time was not what happened at that time. I also knew that everything in this world was predetermined. That was why I told you that I didn't care about the fight between you two, and just wanted to return to the Midland and carry forward the Xianmen. If the people in the world and even the things in the world are predetermined, we just need to follow the fate. After seeing the terrible power that day, I no longer wanted to compete with the Deva. In that case, I can only do something for the common people in the world. It's not because I'm a saint with a higher moral character than anyone else, but, at my level, what else is there to do? Dragon King is also a cultivator. He knows that the riches and honor of the world are like floating clouds to us. If there is anything that is attractive, it would be power. But if I return to the Midland, I don't even have the pursuit of power in the world. So, what else can I do? I can't do evil, so I can only do good. My thinking is another kind of seeing through the world of mortals. Li Yunxin was sure that the 10,000-year-old ancestor was telling the truth. He saw space. He also saw people and starships shuttling in space. These things were not something that a native of this world could make up. He wanted to ask which 3 things were confirmed, but he wanted to know what happened next. So he didn't speak. Chapter 723. Then the cloud mountain became brighter and brighter, and the entire Rual water boiled more and more violently. There were even flames under the water, as if a volcano was about to erupt at the bottom of the sea. These methods should be the methods of the Celestials. But the power used is real spiritual power. I've been in the Rual water for 2,000 years. This is the first time I've seen such powerful spiritual power. I almost don't need to feel it, I can see it with my naked eyes. It should be the Dragon Island absorbing spiritual power from the water and underground, and then pouring it into the cloud mountain. I've said before, the power in that light is incomparably powerful. It makes me, a profound realm expert, feel like I'm just a speck of dust. But this kind of light poured into the cloud mountain for a whole 2 hours. The 10,000-year ancestor sighed in a low voice. In front of this kind of power, even the power of the Supreme is just like an ant. Although I said that the Celestials are people, they are people who are stronger than us. But they are indeed much stronger. After sighing, he was silent for a while. Li Yunxin's face also showed a dignified expression, as if he felt the same way. But in fact, what he was thinking and what the 10,000-year ancestor was sighing were completely different things. Although the 10,000-year ancestor had lived for a long time and seen a lot, he could never get rid of the limitations of this world's way of thinking. This kind of limitation was not something that could be solved by being gifted or living for a long time. They were used to the power of the individual. From the concept to the profound realm and even the supreme, every individual had a powerful power. Although they would also use tools, but whether it was the way of thinking or the way of using it, it couldn't be more primitive. The more powerful the cultivator, the less likely it was to walk the path of borrowing external objects. But human power ultimately had its limits. In the end, it was much easier to rely on external objects. Whether in Li Yunxin's world or Xiaxing's world, even a 7 or 8-year-old child might know the words, "Pa, I'll kill you with 1 shot." This meant that even such a child also knew and was used to this method of borrowing external objects. It had almost become an instinct. Thus, when the 10,000-year ancestor saw this kind of power, the ripples in his heart were extremely difficult for people like Li Yunxin to understand. He would only think, what kind of existence has such great power? He would not think about whether there was another possibility, that the power was not human but the power of tools. It was just like how people in ancient times saw a shadow of light flying around in the sky. Their first thought was that it might be an immortal. But for people from Li Yunxin's era, the first thought that came to their minds was, maybe it's a UFO. Li Yunxin couldn't empathize with his feelings at that time, but he could understand it through these logical ways of thinking. Therefore, when the 10,000-year-old ancestor sighed with emotion for the second time in a short period of time, he felt that the old man's words were a little more credible. A person's ambition was not limitless. When he realized that he was facing a power that he could not contend against, giving up became the wisest choice. That's why, like he said, he decided not to participate in the affairs of the Celestials, and planned to only care about the affairs of the human world. Li Yunxin leaned forward, looking at the illusion of the old man. Ancestor, you mean I can understand it this way? Penglai, Yingzhou and Fenghu, the 3 islands, through some means summoned the Dragon Island from the void. Then the Dragon Island, Penglai, Yingzhou and Fenghu. Then they drew power from the Ruoshui and poured this power into the Cloud Mountain. Yes, that's right. Then what happened to the Cloud Mountain? What did you see? I was just about to say this. The 10,000-year ancestor solemnly looked at Li Yunxin. About an hour later, the Cloud Mountain was so bright that you couldn't look at it directly. At that time, there was a vast expanse of whiteness between heaven and earth. You couldn't see anything other than the white light, as if the sun was shining directly into your eyes. I think I can't look at it like this anymore. The spiritual energy here is so strong. If another hour passed, I'm afraid that even if I'm in the Ruoshui, my body will explode from the spiritual energy. But just when I was about to risk leaving the island, the white light suddenly dissipated. First it was night, stormy waves, then it became as bright as day. But in the blink of an eye, all sound, light and waves were gone. On the entire sea, only the Dragon Island was left, surrounded by Penglai, Yingzhou and Fenghu. Only the Cloud Mountain, was connected to the Dragon Island by a thin line of light. The surface of the water was as flat as a mirror, there wasn't a trace of wind or wave. I suspected that it was the end of the matter. I felt that it was a trick of the celestials after all. I couldn't see anything, it was only natural. So I looked up at the sky. As a result, I found that the sky was a little unusual. After the stormy waves just now, the sky was a little misty. The water vapor in the Wuxia should have evaporated into the sky, and turned into a thin layer of clouds. So the stars in the sky were sparse, it looked like a rainy day. But on the top of the cloud mountain the sky was clear. The stars were densely packed and colorful. It was a starry sky that I had never seen in all these years. At first I thought that the mist in that area was dispersed and the sky was revealed. But when I looked closely, it wasn't the starry sky above our heads. It looks like this kind of supernatural power, as the 10,000-year ancestor said. He stretched out his hand to write a few talismans in the void. He should have been a person from Daotong before. Because when he wrote these talismans, a small mirror appeared in front of Li Yunxin. This was a very common method and it was mostly used to spy on others. He understood what the 10,000-year ancestor meant. The starry sky above the cloud mountain belonged to another space. Previously, the cloud mountain absorbed terrible power from the Wuxia. Perhaps it was to open this space. As if a door had been opened. You mean what you saw at that time was the astral world? Li Yunxin said in a deep voice. Did you see the celestials inside? I didn't see the celestials. But I saw a magic treasure similar to the Cloud Mountain and Dragon Island. At first I also wanted to see the celestials. I thought they might be hiding in the darkness. But soon I realized that it was a stupid idea. The stars in the sky looked very close, but in fact they were very far away. Although that space looked small, it might be wider than the entire continent. Where could I find them? So I started to look at those stars one by one to see if there was anything special. After looking for about 2 or 3 breaths, I found something different. It was bigger than usual and it was glowing white. I looked carefully again. I could actually see the outline. It wasn't a round star, but a long and thin strip like a stick. At this time, the top of the cloud mountain began to flash. A total of 37 flashes, I remember it clearly. I thought that since I could see that strange thing at a glance, the cloud mountain must have broken this space for it. So I held my breath and concentrated, wanting to see what reaction that thing would have. But after waiting and waiting, nothing happened. I was so focused on the cloud mountain that I didn't look into the sea. Only now did I relax a little, then I turned to look down. Looking down, I saw that the appearance of the sea had also changed. Below the Dragon Island, there was a patch of fiery red. At first I thought it was an underwater volcano erupting. But when I looked carefully, it was actually the same thing as the starry sky in the sky. That patch of fiery red wasn't a volcano but another space. That space was full of rolling flames. But that flame was like water. There seemed to be some kind of pattern when it rolled and flowed. I only felt that this strange phenomenon should disappear very soon, so I wanted to see if I could find any pattern. But as soon as this thought appeared, I saw 2 figures. The 10,000-year-old ancestor squinted his eyes. There really were 2 figures appearing from the Dragon Island and standing on it. The Dragon Island isn't big, it's only the size of a main hall. Those 2 people stood on it and walked a few steps first. Then they stopped as if they were talking. It was originally impossible for me to see their faces and hear their words. Dragon King should know, although our bodies are strong, they are still limited. If we want to become clairvoyant and clairaudient, we have to use divine abilities. My spiritual power was sealed in the weak water before, so I didn't have any divine abilities to use. But after tonight's experience, the spiritual energy between the sea and the sky is probably richer than any paradise on the continent. I had an idea and tried to secretly circulate spiritual energy like I did on the continent. It actually worked. At this time I looked at the Dragon Island again. I won't hide it from you. Even if I was already in the mysterious realm at that time, that one look scared me out of my wits and I couldn't move for a long time. Who do you think the 2 people on the Dragon Island are? Li Yunxin thought for a moment. Your 2 junior brothers from before. Zhen Xuanzi, Zhen Wuzi. Yes. The 10,000-year-old ancestor let out a long breath as if he still had a lingering fear when he thought of this matter. My first thought at that time was that my 2 junior brothers had found some way to bring Cloud Mountain here, and then, Maybe they wanted to destroy Cloud Mountain and catch everyone in one fell swoop. Once I had this thought, I almost shouted at them. Even if the profound sect had done all sorts of wrong in the past, how could the others in Cloud Mountain be innocent? Just at this time I heard the two of them talking. Zhen Xuanzi said, "I'm afraid it won't be worth the effort." There should have been something else before this sentence, but I didn't hear it clearly at that time. Then Zhen Wuzi said, "No matter what, do your best. We'll only know if we can succeed after another 26 small matters. Let's just enjoy the wind for a night." After the two said this, they didn't speak anymore. They walked a few steps on the Dragon Island before slowly disappearing. After listening to their words, I realized three things. The 10,000-year-old ancestor said in a low voice, "First, these two definitely weren't my junior brothers Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuzi. Their tone, movements, and expressions, they couldn't be the same person. My two junior brothers were already like crazy demons in the end. But these two were too normal. Second, they might not have used spiritual energy. At least, they wouldn't have used spiritual energy to listen and see. Otherwise, I could see and hear them and they should have sensed me. Once I thought of this, I broke out in cold sweat. If I had been discovered earlier, wouldn't I have lost my life? Thirdly, the upheaval I saw that night should have been caused by these two people. Other than the two of them, there should be others. That's why they said, it won't be worth the effort. It should be referring to what they're doing right now. But the 26 small matters that they mentioned. I felt it was strange when I heard it. Until today, I still haven't figured out what exactly it was. Then, after 26 hours, did you see something strange again? Li Yunxin interrupted him. The 10,000-year-old ancestor was stunned. How did Dragon King know? Li Yunxin shook his head and smiled. Then they said 26 hours. 2 hours for us is equivalent to 2 hours for them. 26 hours, 26 hours, 26 hours. Our minute second. This is the celestial man's method of calculating time. The 10,000-year-old ancestor looked at Li Yunxin in surprise. He didn't expect that Li Yunxin would know about these things. He also didn't expect that the problem that had been troubling him for so long would be solved so easily by Li Yunxin. So what happened next? Li Yunxin urged him. After 26 hours, what happened? The 10,000-year-old ancestor looked at Li Yunxin a few more times, then said, Dragon King's prediction is correct. Indeed, after another 26 hours, I saw another strange phenomenon. I didn't expect Cloud Mountain to stay here for so long. But I was afraid that I would be discovered if I acted rashly, so I had no choice but to stay and watch. During this time, Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuzi didn't show up. Until after 26 hours, the sky turned dark again. In the starry sky above Cloud Mountain, that stick-like thing also flashed. Exactly 37 times, exactly the same as when Cloud Mountain flashed before. Then Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuzi appeared from the Dragon Island again. This time I saw it clearly and was even more certain that they weren't my former junior martial brothers. These two people first shouted and shouted as if they were extremely happy. The sentence I heard the most clearly was the 3 words can still be used. The two of them repeated it 6 times. Then they sat on the Dragon Island without saying a word, for an hour. At that time I thought they were thinking and planning something. But when they got up I realized that they were just sitting. Because Zhen Xuanzi said, "This is the last time to enjoy this world." Although I don't really understand these words, I could hear the determination in them. Zhen Wuzi said, "Then the two of us are the black and white impermanents now. They will remember us." Then, the two of them suddenly jumped down from the Dragon Island, straight into the space where the waves of fire surged. From this I deduced, that is the netherworld. The 10,000-year-old ancestor said in a low voice, Cloud Mountain is the entrance to the star realm. Dragon Island is the entrance to the netherworld. Zhen Xuanzi and Zhen Wuzi. Maybe they were possessed by celestials and did something. Chapter 724. After he said all this, he didn't say anything for a long time. He only stared at Li Yunxin solemnly. It was as if he was waiting for Qin Zhao to say whether he believed what he said or if he got any information from it. But Li Yunxin didn't say anything. He raised his hand slightly, indicating that he was still thinking. Everything the ancestor said seemed to mean that this world was not in the same space as the world Xiaxing and Qin Zhao were in. This made him confused. The arts ink could bring the dragon scale and the jade scroll here. This clearly meant that they could travel freely. But aside from this, Li Yunxin thought that Peng Lai Yingzhou and Feng Hu must have formed some kind of activation device. Once they were activated, Dragon Island would appear. And Dragon Island was very likely to be an energy conversion device, to provide energy for Yunshan. As for Yunshan, in the matter that the 10,000-year ancestor saw, he probably played the role of a launcher. It absorbed terrifying power from the netherworld and supplied it to Yunshan. Then Yunshan used this power to open the astral world and send a message to something further away. This happened at the same time as Jin Xuanzi and Jin Wuzi becoming black by Yanjun. The two things should be directly related. When they were at Yunshan, Li Yunxin and Su Yusong guessed that black by Yanjun was created by the Deva. It was used to manage the souls on the ground for the Deva. Many theories back then were verified by the ancestor. But what Su Yusong didn't say and what Li Yunxin just figured out was that Jin Xuanzi and Jin Wuzi must have become empty shells later on. At that time there was no Grand Elder. Jin Xuanzi and Jin Wuzi used a certain method to create a channel between the two worlds. The Deva in the astral world could directly descend to the ground and have a strong body. But did they know this first and deliberately cultivate Jin Xuanzi and Jin Wuzi so that they could use Dragon Island and Yunshan to send a message? Or did they accidentally discover this and did what they did later? However, did they know about this first and then deliberately nurture Jin Xuanzi and Jin Wuzi so that they could use Dragon Island and Cloud Mountain to send messages? Or did they accidentally discover this and then did what they did later? Li Yunxin felt that the latter was more likely. Ancestor 10,000 years old ancestor said that before Black by Yanjun escaped into the netherworld, he had said, "It's not rewarding to work hard." This should mean that those two people should have a conflict with the attitude of the Celestials in the star realm. But no matter what, in the end the Celestials found a way for mortals to cultivate to the grand supreme level. And so the long harvest that lasted for 40,000 years began. What did they do? Things were really as the 10,000-year ancestor said. They should be sending a message. Was the message sent to the people who brought Xiexing here? Where are they? The great tribulation that Gongdi had mentioned and the imminent destruction of the world that Xiexing had mentioned, were they related to those people? Were they here to destroy the world? Li Yunxin took a deep breath. He glanced at the 10,000-year ancestor and said in a low voice, "Do you remember that they said 26 hours? The old man nodded slightly. "That's right. Word for word." "Then the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers per second. Li Yunxin began to mutter some strange words. 1 hour is 3,600 seconds. 26 hours is 93,600 seconds. 600 times 300,000, that's... He furrowed his brows slightly. 28,080,000,000 kilometers. In 26 hours I've traveled 28,080,000,000 kilometers. The 10,000-year ancestor frowned. What is the Dragon King calculating? What's so strange about 26 hours? But Li Yunxin raised his hand, indicating that he should not disturb him. Then he said to himself, "The diameter of the solar system is 0.03 light-years. How far is 1 light-year? How troublesome. 24 hours in a day. 24 hours multiplied by 3,600 seconds is 86,400 seconds. 86,400 times 365 is 31,536,000 seconds. Then multiplied by 300,000 kilometers, it is 4,608 billion kilometers." He looked at the 10,000-year ancestor. 1 light-year is about 4,608 billion kilometers. The 10,000-year ancestor frowned again. Dragon King is... This is then multiplied by 0.03. I remember that the diameter of the solar system is 0.03 light-years. Then it is 28,382,400,000 kilometers. The radius is about 191,200,000 kilometers. 14. 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 191,200, Li Yunxin said this and was silent for a while. Then he took a deep breath. Light is emitted from Cloud Mountain. It is received by that thing. So that thing also starts to flash. Its flash can be seen by us. The round trip took 26 hours, covering a distance of 28 billion and 80 million kilometers. Divided by 2 it is 49 million kilometers. And the radius of the solar system is about 49 million kilometers. He looked at the 10,000-year ancestor seriously. This means that if we are still in the solar system, that thing is at the edge of the solar system. The 10,000-year ancestor, ? The same 365 days, the 4 seasons are distinct. Li Yunxin was still looking at him. This means that the distance from the sun has not changed much. Then, is it still Earth? I'm still on Earth? The 10,000-year ancestor asked no more questions. He knew that Li Yunxin knew some inside information that even he did not know. The things that he couldn't understand now should belong to that part of it. It was just that the expression on the face of this Dragon King now looked a little shocked. After a while he said, "You said, in 40,000 years 3 things came true. Did only 3 come true, or there must be more than these 3? The 10,000-year ancestor thought for a while and said, "I did not deliberately record those 3 things. It was later things that happened that made me remember. I was in weak water and the things I could know were limited. There must be a lot of things that came true on land, but I do not know. Only then did I know that everything in the world is predestined." Li Yunxin frowned and waved his hand, seemingly a little impatient. He had always been good-tempered before, but now he showed such an attitude, which could only mean that he had thought of something terrible, so he did not even bother to put on a show. "Your disciple previously said that I would be defeated at sea." Li Yunxin looked at him. "He said it was your prophecy. Did you also see it that day? But I am fine now." The 10,000-year ancestor shook his head and smiled. "Sigh, I am ashamed. In front of the Dragon King I do not lie. Some things, such as the Dragon King, perhaps I did not see the whole picture. I only saw that the Dragon King was besieged by the army and could not escape, but I did not expect the changes after that." Li Yunxin was silent for a while. "That is to say, the illusion you saw that day may be a projection of the future. In other words, there is a possibility of disorder. I feel like I am now in a movie." He began to say strange things again, but the 10,000-year ancestor had slowly gotten used to it. When in the other world, Li Yunxin had seen a film. It said that an astronaut in space accidentally landed on a strange planet. There the apes were the masters and the humans became slaves. He went through hardships to return to space, to return to Earth. In the end he saw the half-buried Statue of Liberty on the seaside of that planet. Li Yunxin had no feeling at all when he saw this film. Or rather, he had to think about it to understand how ordinary people would be shocked when they saw such an ending. Now he had experienced it. It should be more intense than most people in that world could experience. He originally thought that he had transmigrated to some foreign land. But the sky above his head was very familiar, except for 1 or 2 stars missing. When he had free time he would think about where he was. But since there was such a thing as soul transmigration, it meant that there were many rules in this world that he did not understand. Then, with his limited knowledge, it was undoubtedly an arduous and unrewarding task to speculate about how the world should be. So he did not think about it in depth. Later he learned more and more and began to realize that this seemingly fantastical and magnificent world should actually be built on some iron rules. As he understood more inside information, he finally gradually realized, just like now, it was very likely that he was still on Earth. Maybe he had transmigrated to a very distant future. Although this inference was not conclusive, but if it was true, where else could he go? He had plans to go back. After a quarter of an hour, Li Yunxin collected his thoughts and whispered, "I already believe 80 to 90% of what you said. It doesn't matter if you want to borrow my strength or cooperate with us, I can agree to either. But I just need you to tell me one thing clearly." Li Yunxin shook his head. The 10,000-year ancestor could not tell what he was thinking. "What is the big formation in the vast sea?" The vast sea formation used the sea cave as the eye of the formation. There was no doubt that there were skeletons like the ones seen on land in the formation. That day they only absorbed tens of thousands of demons and were already difficult to deal with, and they seemed to be extremely cruel. Now that the one in the vast sea had been raised for tens of thousands of years, what would it look like? Perhaps even Grand Supreme could not describe its realm. Such a thing. Why did the 10,000-year ancestor get it? I wanted to tell you. The 10,000-year ancestor's reaction was beyond Li Yunxin's expectation. Just now, I only said that Jin Xuanzi and Jin Wuzi jumped into the netherworld. After that, there was something else. Li Yunxin thought for a while. Is it related to the vast sea formation? The old man looked at Li Yunxin deeply. Dragon King, do you want to take a break before listening? Li Yunxin was stunned. Then he realized what the old ancestor was talking about. It happened 40,000 years ago. But the formation left by the saint of painting was 2,000 years ago. Many thoughts made his mind go blank. He did not even think about this point. The 10,000-year ancestor must have noticed this. That was why he asked him if he wanted to take a break. He waved his hand and sighed. Please continue. Actually, it is related to that formation. But it is not what Dragon King thinks. Back then Xianxia and Wuxia opened the entrance to the Star World and the Netherworld. After 24 hours the two of them entered the Netherworld. Cloud Mountain left and Dragon Island disappeared. Penglai, Yingzhou and Feng Hu also returned to their positions. But I remember that place. Usually it is difficult to see the stars in the weak water. But that night I could see it. Since something magical happened there, I naturally had to remember it. According to the position of the stars in the sky, I marked it. Li Yunxin nodded. When he was on the Black Tortoise, he heard the sailors talk about this ability. Now it seemed to be true. Dragon King, do you know where the position I remember is now? Not waiting for him to answer, it is now in the vast sea. This weak water, for these 40,000 years, it has actually been receding. In the past, the vast sea was in the weak water, but now it is very far away. The place I remember is the position of the vast sea formation today. Perhaps because of the drastic change, the flow of spiritual energy is different from the surroundings. The great formation that Dragon King spoke of. Perhaps the person who set up the formation used it as the formation eye because the spiritual energy was different there. At this point, the 10,000-year ancestor stopped and looked at Li Yunxin. This formation at first was used to suppress some things. Those things were the skeletons in the formation eye. Dragon King called them the ancient devils under the Cloud Mountain on the land. Since those things came from the Netherworld, it is not wrong to say so. At first, Li Yunxin grasped the two words. Wasn't this formation set up 2,000 years ago, before Xinryu appeared? Qin Zhao set up this formation to draw the Taishang Xinryu. But that's a long time. It's not just 2,000 years. The 10,000-year ancestor rubbed his hands and narrowed his eyes in thought. At least 40,000 years. Dragon King said 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago, there was indeed someone who combed and adjusted the spiritual energy in the formation. But the skeletons in the formation are indeed 40,000 years old. A few hundred years after Xianxia and Wuxia escaped, the formation on the surface of the sea appeared. I guess the one on the land should have appeared at that time. It was to suppress the skeletons in the eye of the formation. When these things appeared, the area within a few hundred miles was covered in flames, lifeless for hundreds of years. It's just that it's been so long that no one remembers. You fought with Dragon Fifth under the Cloud Mountain, didn't you? Dragon Fifth's residence has flames all year round. I guess it was left behind at that time. Li Yunxin sucked in a breath of cold air. This 10,000-year ancestor knew too much. Fortunately, he forced him to show up, and fortunately he talked to him politely. Otherwise, when would he be able to find out all these things? The formation on the Midland and the ocean appeared 40,000 years ago. To suppress the skeletons inside. Then, wasn't it Qin Zhao's doing? Did she do the same thing as him, tampering with the existing formation? Not long ago. He was still thinking about how to reach Qin Zhao's level of cultivation, to create such a majestic formation out of thin air. Chapter 725. But now it turned out that this matter was also just an illusory bubble. Just like the dream of going home that he would occasionally have in his heart. Within a quarter of an hour his dream was shattered twice. This made Li Yunxin's expression turn ugly. The 10,000-year ancestor observed his expression and said in a deep voice, "What did Dragon King think of? You can tell us and we can discuss it together." The speed of light, hour, and solar system that Li Yunxin had previously mentioned made this old man look at him even more highly. People like him who had lived for so long were already used to great power. But he would pay more attention to people who had more experience than him. This way River Dragon King was obviously a person with a story. No matter what he thought at the beginning, this ancestor had now indeed regarded him as someone who could discuss with him. But Li Yunxin was only slightly absent-minded for a while. He quickly waved his hand, Please continue, ancestor. You are saying that after your junior brothers Xianxia and Wuxia transformed into black by Yanjun and went to the netherworld, the skeletons in the earth cave and sea cave appeared. Then did they appear before or after the formation was formed? There was an essential difference between the two. If the formation appeared first and the skeletons appeared later, it meant that the skeletons might have been used to set up the formation. If it was the other way around, like what the 10,000-year ancestor said, the formation was used to suppress the skeletons. It appeared before the formation was formed. The 10,000-year ancestor understood what he meant. But the other thing I want to talk about is not the appearance of the formation. But after the formation was formed a few hundred years later, something happened in the sea cave in the vast sea, the place where my two junior brothers opened the entrance to the netherworld. But I thought about it later and then I understood a little. The netherworld, the star realm and our human realm are all different. Maybe it's like a few rooms, there's always a wall separating them. My two junior brothers opened the entrance to the netherworld on our side, probably like smashing a hole in the wall, running over and then sealing it. But since it was first destroyed and then repaired, it will not be as strong as before. The 10,000-year-old ancestor stroked his beard. Something happened at the previous breach, the sea cave in the vast sea. The netherworld chi is gradually gathering towards the sea acupoint. Netherworld energy? Xianxia said softly. What is it? He had only recently learned of the existence of the netherworld. However, it had always existed in concepts and legends. Now that the 10,000-year-old ancestor mentioned the netherworld aura, he could finally be considered to have come into contact with proof of the existence of the netherworld. It's very similar to the spiritual chi of heaven and earth in our human world. In the beginning, when it spilled over, my disciples and grand-disciples who were outside came to report the good news to me. It was said that the Wuxia water actually had a heavenly abode, and the spiritual energy was abnormally abundant. Just by looking at it from afar, one could feel the boundless power contained within it. If used properly, perhaps you can cultivate in the Wuxia. But I've seen the moment when the 4 islands and 1 mountain converged, and I know that there is a power in this world that is far beyond our imagination. So I first sent people to investigate carefully. This investigation proved that my worries were right. Those who came into contact with the spiritual chi immediately died. And the appearance of their death was somewhat familiar. The 10,000-year-old ancestor paused. That kind of death is rarely seen by ordinary people. I've only seen it 3 times. It's the appearance of a cultivator who has reached the great accomplishment realm. Do you understand, Dragon King? Old ancestor is saying that the spiritual chi is so abundant that it has reached the limit that the body can bear. Exactly. The 10,000-year-old ancestor sighed. From this, it can be seen that the star realm, the netherworld, are not places that mortals can set foot in. If the netherworld is filled with this kind of aura. He shook his head and did not continue. Xianxia also understood what he did not say. The body of a cultivator always had an upper limit for absorbing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. It was like a valve. Now, when this spiritual chi flowed through this valve as usual, it immediately caused the body to explode and die. Could be seen how rich the spiritual power in the chi was. If the netherworld was filled with this kind of chi and there really was a so-called God, how powerful. For mortals, this kind of power was meaningless. For ants, there was no difference between the power of a human and an elephant. It was not something they could imagine. But for the 10,000-year-old ancestor and Xianxia, one of the top existences in the human world, this kind of power could shock people and also make people feel regret. But Xianxia did not completely agree with the 10,000-year-old ancestor's idea. He was indeed experienced and knowledgeable. But he had the breadth of vision, but the depth was limited to this era. The so-called powerful netherworld chi might be something else. It was just that he could not imagine it. So I ordered my disciples to stay away from that place. Then I began to think about what would happen if one day in this sea cave connected to the netherworld was reopened. But after about 60 years, the netherworld chi that leaked out filled up the sea cave and stopped expanding outwards. The netherworld chi condensed in one place, and unexpectedly gave birth to something. The 10,000-year-old ancestor's voice became slightly heavy. At first, I investigated that thing from afar. I only felt that it was like a spirit monster and did not have any intelligence at first. Its power was extremely strong and extremely violent. Then, after another 200 years, It seemed to slowly have some consciousness. I tried to talk to that thing, but I could not find a way to communicate. Then I thought maybe it was an evil spirit from the netherworld that escaped here. Since my two junior brothers have gone to the netherworld to be the black and white Yama kings, they won't ignore this matter, right? I just need to watch it carefully and not let it hurt my disciples. But after another 300 years, that thing actually climbed up the skeleton in the sea cave. It was like a ghost taking over the body of the skeleton. It slowly blended with it. During these 500 years, this thing was nurturing in the Ruoshui and did not disturb the world. Maybe it was because of this that my two junior brothers did not come to care. This was out of Li Yunxin's expectation. He had seen the appearance of the newly awakened skeleton under Yunshan. It was a terrible kind of violence and greed. The thing that the 10,000-year-old ancestor said was born from the netherworld chi was also powerful and violent. Now that these two things were fused together. Old ancestor, do you want to say that for tens of thousands of years, your disciples spread all over the 9 seas and used formations to absorb the souls of demons and devils in the sea to suppress this thing? I am ashamed. That is what I and my disciples said. The 10,000-year-old ancestor waved his hand. But in reality it is not. I have a secret method. A secret method that I came up with in Yunshan. Originally it was not very useful, but after many years of observing the netherworld chi in the sea cave and improving the secret method, it finally came in handy. I refined the demon souls from the sea into spiritual energy. Then I guided the spiritual energy into the eye of the formation. With this spiritual energy I further guided the flow of the netherworld chi. This is a slow technique. It will take thousands or tens of thousands of years to see results. In this way, I refined the ancient devil. These 2 sentences were simple and light. But Li Yunxin knew that if it was true, it would be a long and difficult process. This 10,000-year-old ancestor was like a cattail plant. Among the top people in the world, perhaps he was not an amazing talent, but because of a lucky coincidence he miraculously survived until now. In the face of all kinds of adversity he was tenacious and had amazing perseverance and patience. The people who fight are either in the true realm or the profound realm. That kind of power. Dragon King, have you ever thought about how innocent the people on the land and along the coast are? Because of this, I want to stop fighting with Dragon King. Once we fight, you have the help of the Grand Supreme, I have the demon god in the vast sea. I'm afraid that no one in the East Sea nation can survive. Chapter 726. The old man in front of him suddenly mentioned the lives of the people in the East Sea country, which made Li Yunxin slightly stunned. But soon, because of his own stupor, he had mixed emotions in his heart. The 10,000-year ancestor should be talking about the tsunami. When the great demons in the mysterious realm fought, the terrible power might even tear the bottom of the sea. The shock caused by such a move would probably push terrible waves to the coast. Such waves might reach tens of miles inland. For people in this era, it was a terrible, natural disaster. During this period of time, such violent power had been released on the ocean more than once. It was hard to imagine what kind of disaster the people on land had suffered. When the 10,000-year ancestor mentioned this matter, he didn't immediately react. The first thought in his mind was whether the other party was referring to some forces or people on land. After a while, he realized that the other party was talking about mortals. And just a few seconds ago, the 10,000-year ancestor told him that the demons in the sea could not be trusted. Because they were not human beings, they could not understand human emotions. Li Yunxin agreed with the old ancestor's point of view. Qin Fengzi made a mistake when he mentioned Lord Dongting to Red Lady. For human beings it was almost instinctive, but a sea monster needed to think about it. But just now, the first thought that came to his mind was not about people. It seemed that sympathy and concern for his kind, at least the kind that used to be his kind, had become weaker and weaker. Perhaps it was also true. When you stare into the abyss also stares into you. This thought made Li Yunxin's heart full of mixed feelings. So he sighed deeply. Alas. The 10,000-year ancestor looked at him. Is Dragon King also unable to bear it? I am sighing that I have always been the one to persuade others. But today I am almost convinced by you. Li Yunxin stood up. He paced a few steps in the room with his hands behind his back, pondered for a while, then turned around and said, You told me everything I wanted to know, logical and impeccable. For a while I can't find anything to doubt. It seems that you are also a narrow-minded racist, which also explains why you care about the world. If that's the case, perhaps you're really here to help me? He thought for a while and shook his head. It's about time. Today. I am no longer the Li Yunxin of the past. He's definitely worth roping in. Then I believe what you say. Brother Ji. At this point he raised his voice and said, "Come in." As he spoke, he waved his hand to disperse the restriction that he had set up earlier. After a while, the Emperor Li rushed in and emerged from a mass of black wind. In a rough voice he said, "Is everything settled? What should we do next?" "I plan to cooperate with this lifeless immortal sect leader. Don't bother with the grand formation in the vast sea for now." Li Yunxin then looked at the 10,000-year ancestor. "Brother Ji is also my friend. He also has something that he is very concerned about." Zither monarch wanted to go to the Dragon Island, so she asked the old ancestor to let her in. In the future, when we get the Dragon Island, we will capture both of them together. It will also fulfill Brother Ji's wish. The 10,000-year ancestor nodded. "This is easy to discuss. It's just that there are still some things that we need to discuss and come up with a plan." Since they were going to cooperate, things naturally became more complicated. As the old ancestor said, there were many details that needed to be discussed. For example, how did the lifeless immortal sect hide from the Shinryu's eyes? How did they send Li Yunxin to the Dragon Island? How did Li Yunxin leave the Emperor Li on the sea in case of any accidents? When it came to matters like this, it was better to be clear than to be a gentleman. It was also like revealing their trump cards so that neither side would have any stupid ideas. In the long run, once the matter was done, how would the 10,000-year ancestor go to the land, and how would the power on the land be divided? What kind of challenges might be encountered, and what kind of methods would be needed to deal with them? Even with the speed of the three's spiritual sense communication, it would take a few days to discuss all these things. No matter how impatient the emperor was, he couldn't just leave like before. He could only listen patiently. Fortunately, he didn't have the temperament of a wild monkey. He used to be an emperor and he had to deal with many troublesome things every day. Just like that, they talked for a full 10 days. It was said that cultivation was timeless, and in these 10 days the three people did not rest or sleep, and almost all the details that they could think of were finalized. The complexity of this kind of thing might be comparable to the merger of big companies in Li Yunxin's era, but they handled it much more efficiently. On the morning of the 11th day, almost everything was settled. The three of them stood in the air above the sea. The sun rose in the distance, shining brightly. The surface of the sea rippled like fish scales, and there was no wind in the sky. Li Yunxin cupped his hands to the 10,000-year ancestor. "If you and I work together, there will be great things. I hope that we can be honest with each other and not lie. Let's start the next things today." The old man's shadow glowed under the sun, giving off a sense of holiness. He smiled and said, "Of course." Then he turned to Emperor Li and said, "I will immediately order my disciples to let the Guqin lady enter the Dragon Island. It's just that among the three islands of Yingzhou, Penglai, and Fenghu, only the Dragon King of the island knows the way to enter the Dragon Island. Others have no way of knowing. Fortunately, there are secret entrances like the Penglai Island's water prison in the three islands. I will ask her to enter from there." Then he bowed to Li Yunxin and said, "According to what I said before, please retreat from the vast sea formation. Let me refine the demon god in the formation and it will be a great help to us. Dragon King, Ghost Emperor, I will leave now." As soon as he said this, his figure immediately dissipated. Li Yunxin rubbed his hands, looked at Emperor Li and said with a smile, "Brother Ji, please take care of the sea." The Ghost Emperor looked at him suspiciously. "I don't like to ask about your affairs. But now I can't help but ask, do you really believe what that old thing said?" Li Yunxin squinted his eyes and looked at the ocean for a while before smiling. "Do you believe me?" After saying this, he turned around and returned to the stone mountain. He returned to the stone room and sat by the window. He spent a quarter of an hour in silence, trying to recall all the doubts that had been plaguing his mind for the past few days and going through them once more. Actually, there were only a few doubts. They were the few points that the 10,000-year ancestor didn't want to talk about. For example, to what extent could he control the demon god in the vast sea formation? How could he use his supernatural power now? And how could he manage on land in the future? But these were obviously the old ancestor's private affairs. It was reasonable that he didn't want to talk about it. However, the other thing that Li Yunxin expected had not happened yet. It has already come to this. Are they really not going to show up? If the Dragon Island was really the entrance to the Netherworld, he would be able to control the entrance after he cooperated with the 10,000-year ancestor. This was not the result he wanted. Someone had pushed him here. One of the most obvious contributors was Li Chuanfeng's host, Mu Nanju. But at the start of the fight there were others who also put in a lot of effort. Li Yunxin thought that they were on the same side as Mu Nanju, and that they were the support of Mu Nanju's master. But now he realized that they had nothing to do with each other. The others he was referring to was Black Bai Yanjun. Outside the city of Wei, Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan were exhausted and almost died. In his dream he saw Black Bai Yanjun. The two of them sang the same tune and sent his soul back. Now that he thought about it, he didn't know if he was really surprised or just joking. Then Bai Yanjun showed up and taught him the method of possession. Now that he thought about it, it was that method that made him become dragons, and what happened next happened. At that time Black Bai Yanjun thought he was Xianxia. After that they lost contact. Maybe something happened underground, or maybe they realized that he was not the person they were looking for. If it was the latter, Li Yunxin might be able to do more than Xianxia and open the entrance to the Netherworld. Did the Black and White Yama Lords want this outcome or not? Either way, it was time for them to jump out, either to tell him something or to stop him. Previously, he felt that Ancestor 10,000 years should come to see him because of his intuition. Now he felt that Bai Yanjun should come to see him because of his intuition, through reasoning. This meant that in his mind Bai Yanjun had more reason to do so than Ancestor 10,000 years. He should come. As Li Yunxin thought so, he took a deep breath and calmed himself down. Bai Yanjun would definitely bring him important news. He had to get his news before he could proceed to the next step. But he waited from sunrise until the moon hung high in the sky. During this time, Emperor Li came to see him several times and asked some irrelevant questions. He also went to the vast ocean to subdue a few big demons and came back to talk for a while, but Bai Yanjun still did not appear. Li Yunxin felt a little anxious in her heart. What he was most afraid of was actually the first inference, that something really happened in the Netherworld and even Bai Yanjun could not appear in the world. He wanted to figure out a lot of things, and he also knew that the answer to many things might be in the Netherworld or the astral world. He must open the entrance to the Netherworld and take a look inside. But what if there was a situation that he could not bear? Maybe it was because he was really tired after talking with Ancestor 10,000 years for 10 days. Or maybe it was because he had overdrawn himself recently and did not have a good breath adjustment. He felt a little sleepy, which made him squint his eyes slightly. Half asleep, he vaguely saw a black gas coming from the direction of the vast ocean. At first he thought it was the black wind that Emperor Li transformed into, but after 2 breaths, he realized that it was not the demon power of the Ghost Emperor. After another 2 breaths, his heart suddenly jumped. How could he be so sleepy? At this moment, a shrill voice sounded in his ears. "Don't force yourself, sleep. I can only see you in my dream now." Chapter 727. After becoming a demon, Li Yunxin slept very little. To him, sleeping once in a while was equivalent to tasting tea, or admiring the moon. When had he ever felt such a strong sense of drowsiness? He knew that this sleepiness was done on purpose by someone. It would have been better if he hadn't heard this sound. When he heard this sound, he was immediately startled. His sleepiness was completely gone and he woke up. He immediately looked left and right. Everything was normal. That voice just now was Bai Yanjun's. In the past, Bai Yanjun had used a similar method to see Li Yunxin in his dreams. First he told him to fall asleep, then talked through his divine sense. This time he probably wanted to use the same trick again. But perhaps because Li Yunxin's cultivation was not what it used to be, he couldn't charm him anymore. This was not the result Li Yunxin wanted. He longed for a meeting. So he immediately sat up straight, closed his eyes and wanted to fall asleep again. But whether it was a mortal or a deity, it was not easy to fall asleep with a heart full of worries. He sat quietly for a quarter of an hour, then got up and lay on the ground, still not sleepy. He simply sealed off his senses, numbed his body and made himself meditate. This state was very similar to sleeping, and the effect of resting was much better than sleeping. But it was not real sleep. He never thought that he would experience the pain of insomnia again. After going through this torment for a full 4 hours, he finally felt that his thoughts were gradually slowing down and his consciousness was slowly blurring. He forced himself to maintain this state, and after an unknown amount of time, suddenly, a blurry shadow appeared in front of him. It was as if Xianxia was underwater and sunlight shone through the surface of the water. He knew that he had fallen asleep and that he was dreaming. He could maintain a clear mind when he meditated, but this was the first time he consciously maintained a clear mind in a dream. In his previous world there was a saying of lucid dreaming, but he had never tried it. Now this was the first time he entered that state. When he looked at himself again, he found that he was already standing. There was a blurry darkness around him as if he was standing in chaos. But there should be something in the darkness, faintly discernible, as if it was constantly moving. Once his attention was focused on a certain place, there would be a flash of a dark red eye. Looking up at the sky, it was clear and bright. The sky was a deep blue, and a blazing sun hung overhead. But the sunlight couldn't shine down. The darkness he was in and the light on the zenith seemed to be two separate parts. Xianxia realized that this was the space he had created in his dream. Dreams always reflect some kind of conscious activity of the dreamer. The darkness and chaos around him should be because he has been thinking about the netherworld. In his mind, the netherworld should be like this. It was like the netherworld, muddle-headed and dark. The figures moving around him and those terrifying red eyes should have hinted at his worry about his situation. Strong enemies were lying in wait and no one knew where they would shoot arrows from. The azure sky above his head made him slightly puzzled. But soon he realized that it also meant that he felt a sense of relief from the bottom of his heart. In the past he had always been able to survive in desperate situations. Now that he was finally safe for the time being, there was a new sky in his heart. However, the current situation of safety was not permanent. Looking at the future, the road ahead was still uncertain. Perhaps this was why the sunlight from the zenith could not penetrate. Now he knew that he was dreaming, but he couldn't control his scattered thoughts. As he watched the ball of light slowly condense in front of him, he was thinking about these irrelevant things. Until the light finally condensed into a human figure. It was indeed Bai Yanjun. But the Bai Yanjun in front of him had changed slightly. The tall hat on his head was gone and his hair was loose. The long bright red tongue in his mouth was also gone. He didn't know if it was retracted or broken. His eyes were originally very small and looked ferocious and terrifying. Now one of his eyes was gone and became completely muddy. He didn't know if he was blind. Seeing him like this, Xianxia was shocked but not too surprised. When he was in the secret room in the Cloud Mountain, he had seen an illusion. The Black Llama King died in the sea of lava, skewered on a long spear. That scene was terrifying. It was hard to imagine how the Black Llama King, who was equivalent to a god, would die in such a way. Xianxia used to think that that memory could be a projection of something in his subconscious. Even if it was real, it could only be referring to something. But now that he really saw Bai Yanjun like this in his dream, he frowned. What happened to your eyes? He had to first find out if what he saw was real, or if it was a figment of his subconscious in the dream based on his worries. Bai Yanjun had a complicated expression on his face. He stared at him for a while and suddenly said, Xianxia, when you wanted the power of souls at the foot of the Cloud Mountain, why didn't you go kill people in the world? With your supernatural power at that time and the situation in the world at that time, it wasn't difficult for you to kill tens of millions of people. Why did you put yourself in danger? His voice was still sharp. But these questions didn't sound like questions but more like questions. Xianxia was stunned. Bai Yanjun immediately screamed, "Speak!" He didn't know what this guy was up to. He subconsciously tilted his head, but he didn't hear the great sage. Now he was in a dream, not in reality. He looked at him suspiciously and thought for a while. I thought I had made it clear to you in Dongting. Bai Yanjun immediately said, when I gave you the book of Yin Yang in Dongting, you said that although you didn't care about the morality in the human world, you knew that without those things, the world would be in chaos and everyone would have a hard time. Therefore you didn't want to mess it up and you didn't want others to mess it up. Has your way of life changed? No. Xianxia said, but am I dreaming now or did I really see you? When I was on the Cloud Mountain I saw the Black Llama King die. He died. You were in a dream. And you really saw me. When Bai Yanjun mentioned the Black Llama King, his mood didn't change. Don't talk nonsense. Since your way of life hasn't changed, then listen to me first. As soon as he finished speaking, Bai Yanjun suddenly appeared in front of Li Yunxin. The tip of her nose was practically touching the tip of her nose as she glared at him fiercely for a while. Only then did the pupil of her remaining eye suddenly shrink into a tiny black dot. Good. Why didn't I realize that you were a fake back then? Li Yunxin said without batting an eyelid. You never asked me. I never admitted anything. Sophistry. Bai Yanjun snorted, seeming to be very angry. But because of some reasons he couldn't vent his anger. He could only continue to stare at him. No matter who you are and no matter where you hide the person I am looking for, there is one thing. Now you want to take the Dragon Island and you want to join hands with Xianxia, right? Because he was in a dream, Li Yunxin's thoughts were a little muddled. After thinking for a while he realized that the Xianxia mentioned by Bai Yanjun was the name of the 10,000-year ancestor when he was on the Cloud Mountain. I taught you the method to possess a dragon's body in the past, all for the sake of this day. But it was passed to the wrong person, to a fake like you. Bai Yanjun said hurriedly, but your way of doing things is also suitable. Since the situation is like this, I have no choice but to make the best of it. Handing the Dragon Island to you is also the only way. Li Yunxin, let me tell you this first. I haven't appeared these days and ignored the souls on the ground because of the war in the Netherworld. Do you remember what I told you in the Pitfall Mountain? Who are the two enemies of the Celestials? A hint of surprise and doubt flashed across Li Yunxin's face. But he only paused, took a step back and said in a deep voice, you said one is the ancient devil and the other is the true devil. That's right. Bai Yanjun said sternly, that ancient devil has been suppressed for tens of thousands of years. Only the true devil has not been subdued, and has always been hiding in the Netherworld. These days the true devil's power is gradually increasing, and he has been fighting with us in the Netherworld. The war now is not in our favor. That true devil wants to rush out of the Netherworld, come to the ground and swallow the human world. Because of this, I cut off the passage between the Netherworld and the human world so that he can't take advantage of it. But on the Dragon Island there is a door to the Netherworld. Now that the people guarding that door are not strong enough, this matter should have been handed over to you. Li Yunxin, you have to quickly take over the Dragon Island and guard that door so that the devil army of the true devil in the Netherworld won't come to the human world. Li Yunxin frowned. Are you serious? Bai Yanjun's words seemed to be telling a story. With just a few words he handed over an important task to him, as if it was as simple as an NPC handing over a task to a player in a game. If it wasn't for the urgent situation, do you think I would do this? Bai Yanjun looked behind him as if there was something hidden in the darkness that made him feel uneasy. Then he stretched out his hand and pulled in the void, and pulled out a long spear. The moment Li Yunxin saw this spear he felt that it was a little familiar. Then he took a closer look. It was a big spear that was completely pale white. The spear's blade was very long, almost like a long sword. This thing he had seen it before. When the Black Yama King's body was pierced by a huge spear, wasn't it an enlarged version of this thing? This spear is called Wolf's Back Angry Lion Spear. It is the spear used by the Supreme Heavenly Emperor, the Master of the Astral World, before he achieved Tao, and it has been left in the Netherworld to suppress the true devil. Now I will give this thing to you. As Bai Yanjun spoke, he threw the spear to Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin had to catch it, and then he found that this thing was much lighter than he expected. You will take this spear and guard the entrance to the Netherworld. If there are any evil spirits that escape from there, use this spear to kill them. My time is up, I have to go back immediately. Li Yunxin, you have to remember, you can only believe half of that Xianxia's words. If you do this well, the 3 realms will be saved. If you don't, a great calamity will come. Take care of yourself. After saying this, Li Yunxin suddenly heard a crisp sound beside him. He suddenly woke up. A pale long spear was lying quietly on the ground. Chapter 728. It was not a simple dream. It was indeed. Bai Yanjun had met him in his dream. Li Yunxin was stunned for a while, feeling a little dizzy. It was as if he had slept too little or too much. His mind was tired and his stomach was sick. He had not experienced such a feeling for a long time, but this reaction further proved that the dream was not an ordinary dream. Bai Yanjun must have used some method to make use of his spiritual energy to create the previous scene in his mind. When he came, he seemed to be avoiding something or someone. Was it related to the netherworld? He also said that the various caves and sea caves were suppressing ancient devils. This also confirmed the words of the 10,000-year ancestor. The formation had appeared long ago. It was to suppress those things. These thoughts turned in his mind and he felt that his thoughts were a little clearer. So he used his left arm to support himself and half stood up. He stretched out his right hand and carefully touched the wolf spine raging lion spear beside him. His fingertips touched the slightly cold body of the spear, and his mind immediately became empty, as if his thoughts had been forcibly pulled away. But this emptiness was not the kind of emptiness when he was unconscious or muddle-headed. He still retained many of his complicated consciousness and it was even clearer than before. It was just that these things originally lived in a small world inside his head, but now this world had suddenly become extremely vast and profound, as if it was connected to the world. The sudden strange feeling made Li Yunxin's fingers tremble. With this tremble it left the body of the spear. The feeling of vastness instantly disappeared, but he had already sat up and stared at the spear for a while. When he escaped into the picture scroll he had made, his consciousness blended with heaven and earth, and he could almost experience the feeling of omniscience and omnipotence. When he returned to the real world from there, he felt a little cramped and narrow. And when he touched the wolf spine raging lion spear, he experienced the same feeling. It was much weaker than the feeling in the picture scroll, but it seemed to have the same principle. When the White Hell Lord had given him this spear, he had thought that it was some sort of weapon or token of some sort. Now that he had touched it, he knew that it was no small matter. The Yama King of the Netherworld actually gave such a treasure to him, who clearly knew that it was a fake product. It could be seen that the urgent situation in the Netherworld that he mentioned was not an alarmist statement. He stood up and pointed at the gun. He planned to use his demonic power to pick it up and take a good look at its mysteries before giving it a try. But the spear did not budge. Li Yunxin exclaimed softly and tried again. He still did not move. That was strange. It wasn't that his demonic energy was sucked away by the spear or anything else. Instead, it was more like his demonic energy was bounced away upon contact with the spear, unable to wrap around it. It was as if demonic power was electricity, and this thing was a complete insulator. He immediately squatted down and looked at it carefully. He used his divine sense to look at it. Logically speaking, he should be able to see the structure, the material, and even the holes visible to the naked eye. But in his vision, which was infused with demonic power, the spear seemed to have become a black hole. He could not see what was inside, only its appearance. The more he thought about it, the more frightened he felt. After a moment of hesitation, he raised his hand and picked it up. That feeling appeared again, and his consciousness became distant and broad. In addition to his own clear consciousness, there were many other feelings and experiences that came one after another. But these feelings and experiences were all vague. It was as if a person had realized and felt something in a half-asleep state, and then woke up with a start to recall the past. Therefore, there were only some vague impressions left in his mind, and there was no way to extract any real information from them. Li Yunxin carefully sensed for a while, and confirmed that these things would not disturb his thoughts, but should be brought about by the spear itself. It was like a connector connecting Li Yunxin's thoughts with something else. After a while, he realized that those feelings seemed to contain some emotions. Those emotions were subtle and messy, and even a scheming person like him had to carefully distinguish them to detect them. Most of them were emotions of anger. Some kind of anger that could not be obtained, and anger that was about to be obtained but lost. It seemed to come from every part of the world. From the rivers and seas, from the valleys. From the prosperity of the present world, from the ashes of the past. Li Yunxin sensed these feelings and tried to distinguish them more clearly. But those feelings were too fragmented and far away. He only knew that they were angry, but he could not separate them from rational emotions. It was as if it was not a human but another kind of existence with human-like thoughts. He quickly thought of a possibility. The ancient devil, that Bai Yanjun said was suppressed 40,000 years ago. According to him, the ancient devil should have been dismembered and suppressed everywhere in the world. But obviously that thing had an extremely strong vitality and it did not die. As long as it broke free and absorbed power, it would come back to life. Through this spear he experienced a grand emotion that came from everywhere in the world, and it was full of deep anger. Was it the emotion of the ancient devil? How could it be related to that thing? But there was something different about it. Li Yunxin did not pay attention to it before, but now that he carefully observed it, he slowly picked it out. Among all the subtle emotions he experienced, other than anger, there was also a little bit of expectation, just a little bit. It was like a red dot in a sea of green, or a syllable hidden in the endless noise. This caught his attention, but he couldn't figure out what to make of it. He weighed the spear in his hand again and took out the jade scroll of enlightenment. He stored many of the techniques he obtained from the Cloud Mountain in it for convenience. Now he needed to find a spear technique. Low-level warriors in the world valued moves and techniques when they fought. Once he had cultivated a profound inner force, moves would only be the icing on the cake. Once they became a cultivator, the chance to use their fists and feet was even rarer. It was a bit like the world he came from. Here, everyone was fighting from afar, competing with spells and magic tools. But when they reached a higher realm, it was like returning to the natural state. For example, a super demon like Li Yunxin had an unbelievably strong body. Any magic weapon or spell could only injure it, but it was hard to kill it. At a time like this, they had to fight in close combat. Now that he had a treasure like the wolf spine raging lion spear, if he learned some spear techniques he would be successful. He was a smart person. After finding the spear technique, he only needed to take a few glances to imprint it into his divine sense. What was left was to slowly experience it in actual combat, master it thoroughly, and then form his own style. Actually, this spear technique was only a guide. Actions that normal people could not do, he could easily do it. It was not something that could be restricted by any rules. He told himself not to think about the secret of this spear, but to focus on what was in front of him. Food had to be eaten one bite at a time, everything had to be done step by step. Next he had to deal with Zither Master and Shinryu. The 10,000-year ancestor had already sent someone to let Zither Master go to Dragon Island. He had to quietly listen to the news. Listening like this, he listened for a few more days. In these few days, Emperor Li had almost leveled half of the ocean. He came from the land, he was strong, he had Li Yunxin's support and the 10,000-year ancestor's approval. He was in the limelight. It was impossible for Shinryu not to know what happened on the ocean, but there was no news about it. Previously, she had turned a drop of blood essence into Li Yunxin's forehead so that she could spy on his every move. But in the end, she underestimated the 9th dragon son. In less than a month's time, Li Yunxin took off that thing. It was as if they had broken off on the surface. Shinryu did not calculate what Li Yunxin had done before. She suffered a loss in silence. Perhaps he was thinking of dealing with it in the future. But now that the army was defeated like a landslide, he was forced into a fluster by Li Yunxin's interlocking plan. Right now it was time to worry about what was about to happen on the Dragon Island. At this time she finally realized that Li Yunxin had seen through her. On a sunny morning, the clone of the 10,000-year ancestor appeared in front of Li Yunxin. "Your Guqin has gone to Dragon Island," the old man said as he looked at the spear in Li Yunxin's hand. "You can start working now." The old man's eyes stayed on the spear for a while. He could tell that it was not an ordinary item. But he did not pay much attention to it. It seemed like he did not know where it came from. Li Yunxin saw the old man's expression. It seemed that even the old man who had lived for more than 40,000 years could not see through this thing. Shinryu might not be able to either. Guqin's trip to Dragon Island was not smooth sailing. There must have been many twists and turns. She was not a fool. She might have thought that this trip was set up by someone. It might be an overt plot to let her go. But as the saying goes, only with strength can one have confidence. She was in charge of a region, she had many powerful subordinates under her, she could naturally plan and act calmly and maintain her rationality. But now that she has lost many of her subordinates and her thoughts are clouded by hatred, even if it's an overt plot, she must continue. People always have more confidence in themselves than others. In the end, it just depends on who has more confidence. Li Yunxin agreed and packed his things. Right now he has 2 treasures on him. One is the newly acquired wolf spine raging lion spear. The other is the 9 Seas map that he painstakingly designed. Since Shinryu was drawn by the art saint, his chi is the same as the heaven and earth. Having this map in his hands is equivalent to holding onto Shinryu's lifeline. That's why after wiping out the 9 Seas army he became fearless. But Shinryu's ability to control the chi of heaven and earth was also very good. Maybe he has other tricks up his sleeves. Li Yunxin knows that there is nothing in this world that he is 100% sure of, so as long as there is a 20% chance of winning, he will do it. Now that he has these two items, he feels that he has a 60% chance of winning. The rest he just has to risk his life. He has always been familiar with this kind of thing. However, when he looked back at the past, he recalled how he had risen from an insignificant speck of dust to his current level of influence, while the true dragon had fallen from its high pedestal. He couldn't help but feel a little emotional. Looking back at the path he took before, it was really dangerous. If he had to go back again, he really didn't know if he would have enough courage. The 10,000-year-old ancestor's figure faded away. Li Yunxin heaved a sigh of relief and rode the wind away from the stone mountain. Chapter 729. After diving into the water prison of Penglai Island, the temperature had become extremely low and the pressure had also become extremely high. Previously, the 9th young master was imprisoned here by Lord Donghai. Many old people from the era of Goddess Penglai were also imprisoned here. It was a prison for felons. Even though Li Yunxin was as tough as iron, he felt as if he was wearing a layer of tight clothes here. Every part of his body was suppressed by the strong water pressure. If he was a mortal or a demon with a slightly lower cultivation, he would probably be crushed into a meat pie. Accompanying him was an old acquaintance, the immortal Zai. The immortal Zai, who had reached the mysterious state, had his physical body destroyed by him and fled back to the Ruoshui River. Now he seemed to have reconstructed a body through some secret method and switched to the ghost cultivation. His realm was incomparable to before. He was only at the peak of the true state. If he was lucky, he could return to the mysterious state. If he was unlucky, he would probably be stuck here forever. However, after seeing Li Yunxin, he didn't have any grudges and talked as usual. All ghost cultivators should have obsessions. Li Yunxin couldn't tell what his obsessions were for now. He didn't know why the ancestor sent such a person to accompany him. Maybe it was to show their frankness. When the two fell to the bottom of the sea, it was dark around them. There were very few living creatures. Occasionally they could see snow falling from the sea. In the distance, there was light from the undersea creatures that glowed. The long spear in Li Yunxin's hand also emitted a faint light, gradually illuminating the area. He had slowly adapted to the sense of vastness brought by holding this precious spear, and soon realized that it was an advantage. His perception was magnified and became more sensitive than before. Dragon King has a master to guide him. He should know where the sea cave is and how to get there. The immortal Zai walked with him on the bottom of the sea for a while and stopped. This was still the strait where the water prison was located. But as they moved forward, they could feel that the water became turbulent and even formed a channel at the bottom of the sea like a stream on land. The temperature in the depths of the ocean was not completely uniform. The difference in temperature and salinity might form undercurrents at the bottom of the sea. But the undercurrent ahead was obviously not due to those factors. At the end of the strait, there was a bottomless cave that seemed to go straight to the center of the earth. The sea surged into the cave, swirling away into the darkness. An endless rumbling sound rang in their ears. It was as if the cave was the mouth of a monster that wanted to suck up all the water in the ocean. Li Yunxin sensed the violent and chaotic flow of spiritual energy from the cave in the distance. To an ordinary cultivator, this kind of turbulence was enough to tear their snow mountain and chi sea apart. It was like a meat grinder. This atmosphere should be the entrance hidden under Penglai Island that Goddess Penglai told him about. However, the three islands of Penglai, Yingzhou, and Fenghu are all moving in the sea, so they should be floating on the water. But regardless of whether it was Li Yunxin's first time here or this time, what he saw were solid islands that were deeply rooted in the seabed. They shouldn't be floating around. Yet he did know that they were moving, that their position could be ascertained on the sea by reference to the stars in the sky. Now the location of Penglai Island had indeed changed compared to the last time he came. There should be some principles that he did not understand at the moment. Perhaps it was the principles of the netherworld and celestial beings. Li Yunxin stopped and cupped his hands towards Taoist Master Violet Knight. "Thank you for your trouble." The two of them didn't speak much along the way. In fact, Li Yunxin knew that the more he spoke, the more mistakes he would make. Taoist Master Violet Knight had once fallen in his hands, so he was afraid that this demon would secretly play tricks. But after he said this, Taoist Master Violet Knight paused. Dragon King, you have to be careful. Although this waterway leads to the Dragon Island, it has always been a dangerous place. The Eastern Sea Monarch once went to the Dragon Island from here. Before him, many great demons also tried, but they all died. These days, the spiritual energy in the waterway is especially violent. You must not let your guard down. Li Yunxin nodded. He took a step forward, but Taoist Master Violet Knight didn't follow. It seemed like he still had something to say. So Li Yunxin sighed and spread his hands. Brother, what do you want to say? Taoist Master Violet Knight hesitated for a moment before saying, what did Ancestor and Dragon King talk about? Li Yunxin was surprised. You're asking me about this? He looked at Taoist Master Violet Knight a few more times. Your question is too broad. We've talked about many things, which one do you want to ask about? And from what standpoint are you asking? Taoist Master Violet Knight, who was at the peak of the true realm, once had a state of mind that reached the profound realm, but now he was hesitating. After a while he said, Ancestor has always told our sect that it is our duty to support the profound sect's righteous path. Since we have formed an alliance with Dragon King. Does Dragon King know what Ancestor plans to do with the great formation in the vast sea? Li Yunxin frowned. Even if he was clever, he couldn't figure out why Taoist Master Violet Knight was asking this. He paused his steps and sized up Taoist Master Violet Knight again. I destroyed your body and realm, but you don't hold a grudge against me. It's not that you destroyed me, it's the calamity of my cultivation. Why should I hold a grudge against you? If it were those profound sect cultivators on the continent, they wouldn't say such words. Li Yunxin smiled. They would say that I've become their inner demon and must be eliminated as soon as possible. From this point of view, your path is passable. It was unknown which of his words had touched Taoist Master Violet Knight's heart. The true realm demon cultivator paused again. I also believe that we cultivate the righteous path. Cultivating the righteous path, following one's heart. Not the stubborn heart of the cultivators on the continent. It's also because of this. He looked at Li Yunxin. I admire Dragon King as a person, but I don't agree with Dragon King's path. Li Yunxin replied with an "Oh, I understand. It's like you think I'm a good person, but you don't like what I've done or what I'm doing. Then do you think that your ancestor wants me to participate in supporting the righteous path in the world, and that it will cause your righteous path to go astray?" Taoist Master Violet Knight's expression didn't change. You can say that. Then you want to know if your ancestor exchanged something with me, and what kind of influence I might have on your great cause of supporting the righteous path. Taoist Master Violet Knight opened his mouth under the heavy seawater and seemed to sigh. For tens of thousands of years, the ancestor established the immortal sect, and passed down countless disciples, benefiting our sea race. The ancestor also taught us by word and example and taught us the great path of the human world. But what the ancestor has done these days? First, he rebelled against Dragon King of the Nine Seas and joined forces with Shinryu. Now he rebelled against Shinryu and joined forces with Dragon King. Let's not talk about whether Dragon King or Shinryu is right or wrong and only talk about these things. What the ancestor has done, in my opinion, is not in line with the righteous path. At this time, Li Yunxin finally understood what he wanted to say. He couldn't help but laugh. Oh, you see that your ancestor has used so many schemes and you think it's because he was influenced by me or threatened. Not exactly. Taoist Master Violet Knight looked at Li Yunxin. I'm worried about Dragon King's trip. Dragon King wants to meet Shinryu. But has it ever occurred to you that it's not Dragon King who is stirring up trouble between the ancestor and Shinryu, but the ancestor who is stirring up trouble between Dragon King and Shinryu? What if this is an overt plot by the ancestor and he's sending the Dragon King to his death? Li Yunxin frowned in confusion. Brother, whose side are you on? In his eyes, the Taoist Master Violet Knight today was really strange. First he asked if their ancestor had deviated from his path, and then he worried about Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin had also considered his worries, but he knew that it was an overt plot, and he knew that he had to deal with it as it came. Instead, the Taoist Master Violet Knight, who was supposed to be on the same side as the ancestor, said it. Could it be their lifeless immortal sect's heaven's will technique? Was it really righteous? Was it really for the world? Maybe I'm confused because of my concern. Taoist Master Violet Knight sighed. Looks like Dragon King knows more about this trip than I do. Then I won't say more. Goodbye. He left as soon as he said he would. With a flash, he disappeared into the dark sea water. Li Yunxin thought about his words for a while and felt that this Taoist Master Violet Knight seemed to be hinting at something. But he couldn't figure it out. He gave up on that thought and took 2 steps forward, standing in front of the pitch-black entrance filled with chaotic spiritual energy, and muttered to himself. Great Sage, you said that those small fries were boring, but now I'm going to give you something interesting. I want to go to Dragon Island and meet Shinryu, the ancestor and leader of this world's demons. Right now she probably doesn't like me and there's a high chance that they'll fight. At that time, if I can't protect her, Great Sage, you must help me. My life is insignificant. If you die with me, it'll be too unjust. Right now, everyone in this world knows me. They say that I, Li Yunxin, am powerful and that a few days ago I got the help of the Grand Elder. If we both die on Dragon Island, I don't care what the world says about me, but they'll say that you, Great Sage, have an undeserved reputation and can't even protect me, a profound realm. He rambled on for a long time. Suddenly, a loud roar sounded in his ears. Stop, stop, stop. The bad-tempered Great Sage was irritated by his noise and got angry. But he didn't say anything like, "It's none of my business," which showed that he agreed. Only then did Li Yunxin shut up. But after a while he started talking again. But he wasn't talking to the Great Sage but to Goddess Penglai, whom he took into the Dragon Palace. Little Penglai, it's the way you told me to go to Dragon Island from here. I'm going to jump in now. Think carefully. If there's anything fishy going on, it's not too late to say it now. Otherwise, if something happens to me, you'll be finished too. He loosened the prohibition spell. Then he heard Goddess Penglai's rambling words. No, not really. Do I have to go too? Do I? What should I do if you're killed? What should I do? She came and went with only a few words, sounding a little flustered. Li Yunxin listened patiently for a while, then reopened the prohibition spell in the Dragon Palace and cut off her voice. Right now it seemed that everything was ready. He had to go face Shinryu. Actually, it felt like he had gone through a lot of hardships and finally arrived before the big boss. He checked the preparations he made for passing the trial and checked his red pinger and blue pinger. Then Li Yunxin took 2 steps and flew into the bottomless cave. Chapter 730. In the deep sea he already felt the water pressure was heavy. But once he entered this bottomless pit, the pressure changed. In the water the pressure came from all directions, but in this cave, the pressure expanded from inside his body. The spear in his hand shone brightly, but the surrounding darkness swallowed the light and could only illuminate a part of the world around him. But even in this part of the world there was nothing but pure light. According to what Goddess Penglai said, Li Yunxin filled his whole body with spiritual power and kept it in a condensed state. To use a mortal warrior as an example, it was like pouring inner strength into every inch of his skin. He was a soul that had taken over Dragon Sun's body and cultivated again. Later, his life was connected to the Great Sage, so he could no longer be regarded as a human. He was more like an existence between a ghost and a living creature. Now that he was filled with spiritual power, he became more like a faintly discernible spiritual body, which offset the strong pressure in his body for a while. But he also knew that this cave was not a real cave, but more like a passage that tore apart time and space. The pressure came from inside his body and then from the front, as if there was a huge suction in front of him that wanted to suck him into noodles. However, it quickly turned into a brutal pulling force from all directions, tearing at his body with all its might. Even though he was clear-headed, he didn't know whether all this happened in an instant or over an extremely long period of time. He lost his sense of direction and time. The pressure increased. Just as he felt that he could not hold on any longer, the long spear in his hand glowed again. It was like a shield that protected him. Only now did he realize that the White Hell King had given him this spear. He must have predicted that he would be in danger and wanted to protect him. This meant that what the White Hell Lord had said, what he had asked of him, should be true. Lord Donghai went to Dragon Island through this passage 1,000 years ago, but his cultivation was low at that time. If he encountered this situation, he would definitely die. What the Purple Knight Immortal said just now was also true. The passage had become more and more violent in recent days. The Purple Knight Taoist Master was reminding him out of good intentions, but why was he being so kind? Why did he ask these strange questions? As soon as Li Yunxin thought of this, he suddenly felt a thought flash through his mind like a bolt of lightning. Just as he was about to latch onto that thought, his vision suddenly became clear. He crawled out of the tunnel. He was now in a secret room. This secret chamber was about the size of a spacious main hall. The first impression that it gave Li Yunxin was that it was clean. This sense of cleanliness was both familiar and strange, completely not the style of the Midland. The room was a perfect circle with a high dome and no pillars. The dome, the walls, and the floor were all emitting a faint white fluorescence, making the room bright but not too dazzling. The room was empty and there were no decorations on the walls. Li Yunxin had seen this style many times in his previous world, and it was known as the minimalist style. It was just that he didn't expect to see him here. Dragon Island. Sure enough, it wasn't just Dragon Island. Cautiously, he turned back to look at where he had come from. All he saw was the wall. It was as if he had been thrown out of the void. There was no one else in the room except for him. It was so quiet that he could hear the sound of his own clothes rubbing against each other. With his eyesight, he couldn't see any cracks or tunnels, but he didn't feel that the air was dirty and there was no smell. He remained silent for a while, then raised his voice and said, "I'm here." In such an empty room there should be an echo. But he didn't hear it. It was as if he had entered a recording studio. Li Yunxin took a step forward, scratched the floor with the tip of his spear, and immediately felt some resistance. He had studied this spear for a few days, and knew that once he infused his power into it, it would be almost indestructible. Now that he felt some resistance, it meant that this floor was not ordinary. The spear tip scratched the floor but only left a shallow mark. But the glimmer on the floor was still there, it didn't dim down even a little bit. If Xinryu and Zikun were standing together, they should have known that he would come. This secret chamber wasn't small, but it wasn't big either, it was only as big as a garden. If they had set up an ambush here, it wouldn't have taken much effort. Now that he was left here safe and sound, what were they thinking? Lord Vast Expanse's soul had once told him that when the true dragon summoned him to the Dragon Island to receive the seal, this was the secret room he saw. But behind the secret chamber there was still a chaotic place. Maybe Xinryu and Zikun were hiding there staring at him. Li Yunxin realized a possibility. If Xinryu and Zikun were afraid of the great sage's power, and didn't choose to fight him. He sighed, took a few more steps and raised his voice. "So you're saying that you're afraid of me? That's why Zikun came to Dragon Island and lured me here. Then you plan to trap me here until I die?" He raised his spear and swung it in the air. "Trap me in this room until I die?" Still no one answered him. He forcefully thrust the spear downwards. This time he used 80% of his strength. Li Yunxin poured 80% of his strength into this spear. There was probably nothing in this world that could stop it. But the spear only went a foot into the ground. Only half of the spear blade went in. It wasn't because there was something harder underneath, but because the strength of the spear tip was quickly absorbed and finally it was stuck inside. But this kind of strength, if it was used in Midland, it would be enough to split a mountain. He slightly gasped, raised his hand and wanted to pull the spear out. Then he felt an unrelenting resistance. He had to use both of his hands to pull the spear out. At this moment he finally felt a little scared. Before coming to Dragon Island, the biggest threat he considered were Zikun and Xinryu. He had many ways to deal with them. Maybe he couldn't win, but at least he could save his life. But now he realized that he had missed something. The reason was the same as how his enemies always missed something when they were dealing with him. It was because of his outlook. He came from the other world. That world was much more advanced than Midland. There were many things that people in this world couldn't imagine. Because of his advanced experience, when he thought about some things, he couldn't help but fall into a blind spot. For example, when he mentioned the words interstellar travel to Xianxia on the dragonfly. When he said those words, he saw Xianxia's extremely excited expression. Li Yunxin was also very proud of himself. But now that he thought about it, what he was thinking at that time was very different from what Xianxia was thinking. For example, when a Midland man mentioned the words flying in the air, what he was imagining in his mind was that he was riding on some gigantic bird, or riding on a cloud gifted by an immortal being. But when the people in Li Yunxin's world mentioned these words, they were thinking about the giant flying machines that were created by modern technology. The materials and principles used were something that people in Midland could never imagine. Similarly, when Li Yunxin mentioned the words interstellar travel, The first thing that came into his mind was nuclear power, and the second was near the speed of light. As for the rest, he had no clue. For example, when a Midland person mentioned the word flying, he could only think of flying in the sky, but he couldn't think of any other principles, materials, or systems. At that time, he was probably a Midland person in Xiaxing's world. No matter how hard the natural wood was, it was impossible to build a plane or a 100,000-ton ship. The civilization that was able to conduct interstellar travel must have been changed in many aspects. For example, materials. The so-called Dragon Island should be the product of that civilization, and that civilization was many years ahead of his world. The dome, the walls, and the floor that he could see now, all of the materials used should be the crystallization of that civilization, and should be far beyond his definition of strength. Thinking of this, Li Yunxin gradually had a bad premonition. The worst situation was that he couldn't break out of this room at all, and he would really become a trapped beast. Damn it, he had been fighting against the idiots in this world for too long, and unconsciously, he seemed to have been dragged to the level of idiots. If it was when he first came to this world, how could he not be in awe of the more advanced civilization? How could he have missed this point? Li Yunxin frowned and once again used all of his strength to poke the spear into the ground. But this time, it only went 2 to 3 inches deeper than the last time. When he wanted to pull the spear out, it took him 120% of his strength. Finally, he cursed, "Damn it." This word was like a spell or an order. Suddenly, a light spot appeared in the hall. The light spot quickly turned into an image. It was the image of Shinryu. Li Yunxin stood there with the spear in his hand, and his expression became solemn. Shinryu's image sized him up and smiled. "Li Yunxin, you came uninvited but became a turtle in a jar. How do you feel?" "Good." Li Yunxin did not show any weakness and said, "At least it confirmed my guess. The heavenly lord Shinryu is strong in appearance, but weak in reality and only dared to appear after using this thing to trap me. Before this, I always thought that there must be a limit to the method of transforming the soul into the true body. Even the Grand Supreme Realm has to follow the rules. But the heavenly lord, you can appear thousands of miles away with a clone. It's really unbelievable. Now," he looked around, "it must be with the help of these things. But heavenly lord, do you know where these things came from?" Shinryu ignored his question and smiled again. "Your heavenly weapon can't pierce through here and it's impossible to escape. You should know that the Dragon Island guards the entrance to the Netherworld. Since this secret room can isolate the aura of the Netherworld, it naturally can isolate your thaumaturgy. Moreover," she stopped smiling, "do you think the 10,000-year ancestor doesn't know this? He only thought that you would be a hindrance to him, so he sent you in here. What did he say to you that made you believe him and put yourself in danger?" Li Yunxin smiled coldly and shook his head, provoke. But the smile froze on his face. He remembered what the Purple Knight Enlightened told him before. "You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.